Chairman of the Planning and Land Use Management Committee, if you can please take a seat. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. That was very emphatic. That was great. I appreciate that. As you can tell, the acoustics are not the greatest in this room. So if you do have a conversation, I can literally hear you from here. Just kidding. I think the lobbyists are worried about that one, huh? I want to thank you for being here this afternoon. I do expect my colleagues to join me any minute. If you really feel compelled to have a conversation, please take it outside. We'd appreciate it very much. Today is a special meeting that has one item on the agenda. Long pauses because I'm buying time. It's a special item that hopefully give many the opportunity to speak their mind. To me, we were actually at this juncture in 2002. It's been in the course for almost 10 years. Now we're in a place where we need to move forward, consistent with the court rulings. They finally gave us a playing field, a legal playing field, I should say, that provides us some sense of direction and how we could behave as a municipality. So that being said, just in terms of logistics, many of you already know this, but some of you that are relatively new to the process, or this is your first time, when you come up to the microphone, please speak into the microphone. Just bring it down right next to where we can hear you clearly. If you have a letter, and you know you work hard on your letters, very eloquent, but sometimes you get halfway through the letter and you realize your time is up. So there's a clock next to you. When you step up to the microphone to your right, you'll see a clock there. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Pace yourself so that you can get to your point within those 2 minutes. Also, if you find yourself realizing that the previous speaker made all of the points you wanted to make, it's okay to say, I agree with the previous speaker, and these are additional points, or these are new observations. Give us something different that so we can learn more from you, instead of repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And that would be much appreciated. Okay, so I'm dragging this out as much as I can. I'm waiting for my peers to show up. So it's now, 2:20? In most universities, we would have left already, right? The professor didn't show up, and there you go. There's a professor now. Welcome, Councilman Krikorian. Now we have a quorum. So Roberto, can you please read the item into the record?
Yes, council members, item 1 is a report from the planning department. It's a proposed sign citywide ordinance, and also there's a CAO report on file.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you want to hear from the CAO first or the planning department. CAO is present.
Well, let's hear from the planning department first.
Okay.
And I want to thank the planning department. They've been doing a yeoman's job on this. Even despite the fact that there's 40% of the staff has been eliminated, they're still pushing our priorities, and I appreciate their hard work. So please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Alan Bell, Planning Department staff. This is the third in a series of recent Plum hearings on this particular matter on the citywide sign ordinance. I think it's been 1 year since Plum reinitiated consideration of this particular item and provided specific instructions to the Planning Department to focus on a more limited menu of items relative to the citywide sign ordinance than what the Planning Commission had considered 2 years ago in 2009. After every report, there has been very considerable interest from all different sides on this particular issue. I think we have several hundred pages of written testimony that have been provided each time we have released a report on this particular matter, so there has been a considerable amount of interest on this particular issue. And what staff has attempted to do in going through all of this considerable testimony is to weigh the pros and the cons and to follow the very specific instructions that Plum has provided on this particular matter. Where we are today is crafting an ordinance that most fundamentally responds to the legal mandate that has come out of the case Worldwide Rush versus the City of Los Angeles. The foundation of the city's sign policy is currently today a ban on off-site signage on a citywide basis. However, we are allowed to grant exceptions to that ban through development agreements, through sign districts, and through specific plans. The ordinance that we are doing, that we are recommending today, provides a mechanism to ensure the legal defensibility of that citywide sign ban, and it tears off the very specific direction that the Court of Appeal gave us in upholding the city's ban. In a nutshell, what the court said was that we could grant exceptions to this ban if granting that exception would do one of three things. One, granting that exception would somehow improve the visual environment, it would improve traffic safety, or it would somehow reduce blight. And the court's reasoning was that the very rationale for having a citywide ban in the first place was that by limiting off-site signage, we advance those very same factors. So the flip of it would be, if we grant an exception, we still have to advance that legitimate public purpose of improving the visual environment, improving traffic safety, and reducing blight. So how can we do that? How can we meet that worldwide rush test? There's a lot of flexibility that the courts have granted to the city in complying with that mandate. What is before you are two different items. A reduction in, yes.
If I may, again, people, if you like to have a conversation, please take it outside. It's hard to hear the speaker as it is. With other conversations, it just gets more muddled. So please, if you need to have a conversation, take it outside. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bell.
The fundamental policy question, I think, before the committee is how can we satisfy the worldwide rush test? And what has been put forth in all the different recommendations before this committee is some combination of either sign reduction, reducing the amount of existing off-site signage. That provides a very clear nexus and a very clear satisfaction of the requirement to improve the visual environment and then also to reduce blight. The other mechanism that is put forth within our reports is something called community benefits. And this community benefits package would have to very clearly relate to one of the three options. There are a number of different mechanisms that have been put forth, such as providing public art, streetscape improvements, facade improvements, undergrounding of public utilities. All of these are different options, but what they have in common is that they satisfy the legal requirement that we somehow draw a connection between the approval of the off-site sign and an improvement in the visual environment or a reduction in blight. So at the last hearing on the option, the committee asked us to focus in on a citywide basis what we called option number 3, which was a combination of sign reduction and community benefits. So in a nutshell, what option number 3 did was it would require that for every 2 square feet of new off-site signs that might be permitted in a sign district, that 1 square foot of existing off-site signage would come down. And then, to make sure that we would have a net improvement on a citywide basis in terms of meeting the worldwide rush tests, that an additional public community benefits package would also be required on top of that limited sign reduction. And that the council would have to make a finding that the sign reduction on a 2 square footage up and 1 square footage down, plus the community benefits, those in combination would meet or exceed a net reduction in signage, which was the default standard put forth within the ordinance. So that is the direction that we got from Plum, and that is what the ordinance reflects in the most recent draft dated November 21st. For downtown, we were asked to look at applying option number 4, which provided more flexibility in terms of how we would apply the worldwide rush mandate to the greater downtown housing incentive areas because of the unique and special characteristics relates to downtown. And so what we did are 2 things. One, for National Register historic districts, that would use off-site signage to rehabilitate historic buildings, principally along the Spring Street and Broadway historic corridors, that they would be using the revenue generated from off-site signage and would be using that to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, that in and of itself would satisfy the worldwide rush test, and there would not be any particular requirement for sign districts along those 2 corridors for either sign reduction or community benefits as set forth within the ordinance. Then also for downtown, we are also recommending for what a classification of projects called major regionally regenerative projects that would be providing to the city as a benefit of that particular project, major municipal facilities of a certain significant size, and these projects were located within what is called the Figueroa Corridor sign study area, that those projects, because of the multiplier benefits to the whole city in terms of blight reduction and job generation, and in particular the provision of significant municipal facilities, that these projects would also be exempt from the particular sign reduction and community benefits provisions that are spelled out within that ordinance. And so these would be legislatively determined, and they are written within the ordinance itself as meeting and satisfying the worldwide rush test. So that's the fundamental policy thrust of this particular ordinance, a package of sign reduction and community benefits that satisfies the court's legal framework within worldwide rush. Another main policy issue that has come up repeatedly over the last hearing has to do with the transition rules between how we get to where we are today and the enactment of the new regulation. And specifically, these are what is known as the so-called grandfathered projects. We have well over 10, upwards of 15, I believe, projects that are in different stages of review, either an environmental impact report, council has initiated these projects, or an application has been made for these projects. All these projects are basically on hold until we settle the fundamental policy issues in the citywide sign ordinance. And what the staff are recommending as far as transition rules for these projects are twofold. One, that these grandfathered projects not be subject to the limitations as far as location or size of the sign district or the particular zoning, that they would be only subject to the rules as they are today, which would allow a one-block SUD or in any kind of commercial or industrially zoned property, and not subjected to the new limitations that are proposed going forward to limit signs, districts to regional centers and regional commercial areas. Now, one of the points that I want to make here is currently, today, the regulatory scheme would allow every single parcel in the city of Los Angeles to be converted into essentially a signed district. So that's the legal regulatory framework that we have today. What this ordinance does is it limits the ability of the council to approve off-site signs covering the entire city and to protect the ban and to make sure that we are only approving off-site signage in areas of the city where it makes the most sense, basically those areas of the city where we are planning for the most intensive commercial development. So back to the transition rules, we would recommend that the grandfathered projects not be subject to those rules in terms of zoning and land use designations, but that the grandfathered projects would have to meet the requirements of the Worldwide Rush test. Specifically, since this is the framework that we need to follow in order to protect the citywide ban, that they be subject to the same requirements for either sign reduction or community benefits as any project that would be filed after the so-called grandfathered date. It's a very important policy distinction, I think, that needs to be made. There's no rational reason for having one standard for Worldwide Rush projects that are currently in the pipeline and a different standard for projects that might be filed after the grandfather date, since we know that today all exceptions must meet the Worldwide Rush test, and the best way to meet the Worldwide Rush test is by requiring either sign reduction or community benefits or some combination of the two, depending upon the policy parameters and the outlines that council wants to establish. At the last hearing, Plum asked us to take a look at whether there are any signed district applications that had been filed that were not included in our list of grandfathered projects and that would meet the requirement for an initiation. There was one that we neglected to add to our list, and this was a project on James Wood Avenue within the Central City West specific plan area. That was referred to Planning Department staff on June 10th in 2008, and so that particular application has been added to the grandfathered list. The second one is Paramount Studios, which filed a notice of preparation for an environmental impact report, and that is consistent with the other criteria of other projects that are currently within the pipeline. However, that project filed its NOP on October the 13th, 2011 of this year, and that is beyond the cutoff date which we had included in our initial staff report of August the 9th, which was the first Plum hearing in consideration of the current suite of staff reports and recommendations. Fundamentally, it's a policy issue in terms of where to draw that cutoff date before Plum. So if we were going to include Paramount Studios, we would have to move that cutoff date forward past August the 9th, certainly to at least October the 13th of this particular year. So those are our recommendations relative to the transition rules. And then there are, just want to highlight 4 other main policy issues that have been addressed in all the hearings to date, and that where we received very specific instructions from Plum to address those policy issues. The first main policy issue that I want to touch on relates to off-site signage in city parks and city facilities. a lot of public discussion about that particular issue. And the instruction that we got from Plum was to limit where off-site signs would be permitted in city parks and city facilities. There were two mechanisms to allow that. One was through what is called a comprehensive sign program. A comprehensive sign program is a new entitlement that we are recommending to deal with malls, campus-like environments, to allow off-site signage, but that would not be focused on the street, would not be visible from the public right-of-way or visible from public properties, but on an interior, but would basically function more as an interior sign. The way it was originally drafted, city facilities and parks would be eligible to file for a sign program. The instruction that we got back from Plum would be to not allow that, so the language in this ordinance precludes city facilities from filing for a sign program. The other mechanism that city facilities and parks could conceivably use was something that we are calling an interior sign exception. Again, the sign code applies to signs that are on the exterior of buildings. One of the new development models that we are seeing today is that the era of closed malls is over, and we are now having more open-air malls. And there was a request and certainly a need to allow signage that functions as the equivalent of an interior sign that's not visible from the public right-of-way, not visible from adjacent properties, that these signs do not meet the basic, usual definition of a billboard that is oriented towards and directed towards traffic and pedestrian traffic along public rights-of-way, that these kinds of signs would not be subject to the sign code, and there's a provision that explains that. This exception, based upon Plum direction, would also not be permitted for signs along city parks and city facilities. The only mechanism that would be under the draft would be through a sign district, and that would be basically limited to areas that meet the new standards that have been set forth, regional centers and regional commercial. Both no city facilities and parks are zone PF. So based upon the construction of the ordinance, the only places in the city that are city-owned parks and public facilities that would be eligible for a sign district under this draft of the ordinance would be threefold. One, the LA International Airport. Two, the Port of Los Angeles. And then three, facilities that are within the downtown area, like the convention center, for example. Another policy issue that the committee asked us to address was the issue of sign credits for sign reduction. Initially, we had recommended to assign the credits for sign reduction to the property owner and not necessarily the owner of the sign. Since then, we have drafted language that we believe addresses the concerns that we had in terms of not getting into the middle of any kind of a dispute between the property owner and the sign owner. And the language that we have drafted requiring that a statement of perjury be filed with the planning department, that both the sign owner, the owner that is alleging that they own the sign would notify the property owner and vice versa, and allowing of an appeal provides a mechanism that, in our view, would absolve the city of any liability, would not invite the kind of litigation that we have seen to date, and would also promote the more utilitarian use of the sign reduction mechanism as set forth within the ordinance, and wouldn't be a barrier to sign reduction. I believe that was a concern of the committee the last time, whether that requirement would in fact pose a barrier to sign reduction. So the proposed language addresses the planning department's concerns. Brightness and illumination. We took a second look at the brightness and illumination standards. Again, digital signs, there are two types of brightness. There's the brightness that is ambient brightness, and then there is the brightness that is at the source, the intensity of that. The state of New York has recognized this difference in the types of standards, and they have recognized the fact that two standards are needed, one for the daytime and one for the nighttime. We did field tests, additional research, and we are recommending a nighttime standard of 300 candelas, basically based on our field testing. That would mean that a digital sign during the nighttime would be about as bright as a conventionally lit billboard, and would go along a significant way towards addressing light trespass issues and kind of the impacts of that level of brightness, and a daytime standard of 4,500 candelas during the daytime, which is a standard that we believe would provide sufficient brightness for this type of signage and compares favorably to New York's standard.
Mr. Bell, if I may interject on that one point, my assumptions are that building and safety and planning will be responding to complaints if something is too bright to regulate the level of brightness. Is that something we will work on in the future? Or maybe I'll just be patient and wait till you talk about enforcement.
No, that's a very good interjection. Two other points that I want to make in terms of brightness and illumination. One is that we had also put into this particular ordinance a requirement for sensors and then automatic dimming of digital signs that would respond to the ambient lighting. It's not a requirement today, but we would recommend strongly that we include this particular requirement so that based upon changing light conditions, this automatic sensing technology would be able to adjust the brightness in response to those ambient lighting conditions. We think it's a good requirement and would certainly protect the public interest. And then the second suggestion is that once we get the federal study on driver distraction or new information, that we would allow the council to reserve the right to adjust these brightness standards based upon new studies, new information, new data to protect the public interest, and that we not, as part of this particular ordinance, grant a vested right and lock ourselves into the standards that may be adopted as part of this particular ordinance, but rather, as we get new information, that the council will reserve the right to adjust those standards, again, to reduce driver distraction and to protect the public interest. One technical correction that I want to bring to your attention, and this is a verbal recommendation that is not set forth within the staff report, has to do with the interior sign exception. Again, we put in provisions that said that this very strict absolute requirements that this signage not be visible from any distance from the public right-of-way, not be visible from any distance from any adjacent property, that include architectural features and treatments that would fully enclose it so that it is truly focused on an interior mall. What would we recommend is that we would limit the brightness standard for signage that meets this to the residential standard, which is 0.3 foot candles, but that the brightness of this kind of signage that would meet the interior sign exception also be equipped with these automatic sensing devices to make sure that there would be no light trespass. Again, we feel that this is the more reasonable standard than what we had recommended in our staff report. Those standards were more appropriate for signs that are oriented towards the public right-of-way and clearly visible along a street frontage. This is very different. We think that the residential protection standard is appropriate for this interior sign exception, so long as these signs are equipped with automatic sensing devices. And then the final point that I want to bring to your attention today is the budget for a sign unit. Obviously, there have been a tremendous number of council motions, a lot of interest in terms of policy issues relative to the sign code. I think up to 20 different council motions, from on-site digital signs to relocation agreements, a whole bundle of policy issues that could not be addressed as part of this particular effort, and that would require significant investment in city resources. And we were asked to come up with a first-year budget for a sign unit to do two things: one, to address these policy issues, and then also a staff that would be able to process applications for sign districts. And roughly the budget on a first-year basis would be approximately $1 million to address these policy issues, and so we have broken out for you today the staffing, GIS costs, consultant costs that are required to address those policy issues. So in summary, we believe that this particular ordinance, which has been a long time in coming, is a significant improvement over what we currently have on the books today. It provides a balance between the locations where sign districts can be permitted within the city. It is a significant departure from the current policy, which allows a regulatory mechanism to allow a sign district virtually on every corner, every parcel of the city, and limits them to those areas of the city where it makes the most sense. That does two things. One, it legally protects our citywide ban on off-site signs, which is the foundation of our policy. It makes sure that we are not going to have so many sign districts that we reach a tipping point where the courts may say, well, in fact, you really don't have a ban on signs anymore. One of the original directions from Plum was to beef up the enforceability of the sign code. So the strict and civil penalties that are put forth within the ordinance go a long way towards improving the enforceability of this particular ordinance. We paid very strict attention to improving the clarity and the legal defensibility of these regulations, removing any of the regulations that are content-based, having very clear distinctions and definitions between what is an on-site sign and what is an off-site sign, aligning our regulations to be consistent with state regulations on the matter, and overall creating an ordinance that improves enforceability as well as its legal defensibility. And that makes very good sense, we believe, from a policy standpoint, and meets the goals of the council and as articulated in the original motion that the council adopted in 2008. So that concludes my presentation.
Colleagues, we can move on to other presentations and have questions after. We'd like to have questions now. It's up to you. Okay. Let's move forward then, and we'll ask the next group of...
Do you want to hear from the CAO?
Yes, it'll be the CAO, then we'll hear from Recreation and Parks.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Don't go too far.
Right here.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I'd like to hear from the CAO, please. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. Delilah Pucha with the CAO. The proposed report presented to you from the Department of City and Planning includes revisions, including language to the general provisions section to protect city parks and public facilities from off-site signs. A recent study conducted by the financial consultant KPMG identified corporate sponsorships, through signage and advertising as revenue opportunity for the LA Zoo. However, under the existing sign ordinance, the zoo cannot advertise or have certain sponsorships at the zoo. It's important that the LA Zoo be given this opportunity to apply for a sign district. It should also be noted that in the 2010-11 adopted budget, Council had requested the City Attorney, the CAO, and with the assistance of the Zoo Department, prepare and present ordinances, amendments, or other requirements to amend the existing sign ordinance, which would allow the zoo to maximize special revenue from advertising opportunities. The CAO recommends that the council consider an amendment to the existing citywide ordinance to allow the zoo to apply for a sign district. The potential revenues from corporate sponsorships through signage and advertising at the LA Zoo could offset operational maintenance costs currently subsidized by the general fund. No further questions.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Just in case we have questions afterwards, just hold on for a little bit. Thanks. We hear from the Department of Recreation and Parks, and then if there's anyone here from the Mayor's office like to make a statement or state a position, we'd be more than happy to welcome you to the microphone. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you, council members and the commission. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk in front of you. This is a very touchy issue even amongst ourselves in Rec and Parks. But I've been the general manager at 2 different departments in this city. So I know I can speak for just about every department here, what the needs are and what we're seeing in the future. First off, I feel the charter section gives our commission the authority to regulate what goes on in the parks. That's Charter Section 591. But even if that charter section did not exist, our commission does. And our commission reports to the people in an open forum. I feel strongly that every department in the city that is governed by a commission should have the ability to come up with its own policy. The policy consistent with the intent of the sign ordinance, consistent with the integrity of the neighborhoods, that will allow us to go out and recognize sponsors in a tasteful way to offset the terrible financial crisis we're having right now. I can tell you for over 80 years the charters govern this department. And if I were a person of signage, we could have signs up and down the 170 freeway that bisected every park in your district and made hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not the intent of this department. We did a study recently about what it costs to put on a program. Take baseball. It costs about $150 per participant. We can't charge $150 per participant in many areas of the city. We use donations. We use sponsorships. We recognize sponsors. We embrace these sponsors to come to us. This ordinance, as being proposed, does not give us any flexibility, does not give you the flexibility you need in your own districts. Now, I know there is a need to have a policy, and we in Rec and Parks will never put up a billboard, would never put up a super graphic in any one of our parks. So we need to understand what the citizens of this city deserve and need at this time. And I think that working with our committee, working with our commission, and working with our many residents who are behind us now, I think we can come up with a policy that will meet or exceed anything that we have in this ordinance. This ordinance will create a problem that simply does not exist in our park system right now, does not exist at our libraries right now, does not exist at the zoo right now. We need, as a general manager, the flexibility to assist you in bringing programming back to the city. I can tell you right now, next year's budget is going to be even worse than the last 2 years. And we'll be looking at cutting out programs that are essential to the citizens of this city. I mean, we need to look at this the right way and not really just say no. We do not want to be a signed district. I do not want to be a signed district at any of our parks. I don't want to get an exemption. I think what is needed is clear policy from my commission and the citizens of LA for signs in the park. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I just want to open up the microphone to the mayor's office. Is anybody from the mayor's office that would like to speak or make a presentation? Hope I didn't catch you by surprise. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Brian Curry, counsel to the mayor. Thank you for asking for our input. As you well know, we are in very difficult budgetary straits here at the City of Los Angeles. This fiscal year, we're looking at a $70 million deficit. The deficit for next year is well over $200 million. The so-called easy fixes, to the extent any of them were easy, have been implemented already. And so for the future, we're looking seriously for some combination of innovative new revenue sources, additional cost savings, and very difficult reductions in services. That's why the mayor has for some time been supportive of innovative solutions that would include studying additional revenue from such things as potential naming rights or smart but reasonable sponsorship arrangements for city facilities. So the mayor's position is let's not rule out reasonable alternatives. Certainly any such programs would need to be studied They would need full public participation and input. They would require transparency. They'd require smart thinking by all of us involved in trying to maximize services for the people of the city of Los Angeles. But we just don't think we should rule things out now at this stage of the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Thank you very much. All right, that's all the departments, and now we'll go into public comments. Unless you have questions of any of the departments, we'll go into public comment. Okay. All right, here we go. All right, folks, so we come on up, give us your name and address, and keep an eye on the clock. And our first group of speakers will have Sandy Brown, Mort Allen, and Jacqueline Gare, I believe. Or Kerr, it's hard to read the writing, so apologize.
Did you say we get 1 or 2 minutes?
Sandy Brown, Mort Allen, and Jacqueline Gare?
Is it 1 or 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. I'm Sandy Brown, 10350 Wilshire Boulevard, LA 90024, and I'm here to represent the Holmby Westwood Property Owners Association. I'm not a mathematician, but I don't understand how you get a net reduction when you are putting up 2 square feet and you only have to take down 1 square foot. There is no net reduction in those numbers. So if you really want a net reduction, then it's got to be 1 for 1. And that's the only way that you're going to get it. And in addition to that, we would ask that community benefits go along with that, rather than exchanging one for the other. Because in the end, you are going to get a heck of a lot more signage than you have right now in the city. The second issue that I wanted to bring up is the mandatory takedown. We believe, and I'm speaking really for the 55 groups that we sent you that are listed as being opposed to this ordinance. I think there are 13 neighborhood councils listed in today's agenda that are opposed to this ordinance. And we would ask that there be a mandatory takedown in addition to the community benefits program. The other issue is the park issue. We would request that you prohibit all advertising in parks. We don't believe you should sell your soul to advertising because right now you are low on money. People go to parks because they want to see the animals in the zoo. They don't want to be confronted by various advertising signs on every nook and cranny in the park. There are other ways to get revenue for the zoo, such as a pavilion with a Coke sign or umbrellas that have the logo on it. But advertising signs really are not wanted by a lot of people in this city in our park and recreation facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, we'll have Mort Allen.
Good afternoon. Well, it's been 12 years, 3 city attorneys, millions of dollars that billboard companies have gotten on illegal boards without paying the city a penny, millions of dollars that lobbyists have got, and finally, we have some brains in the city attorney's office between Nooch and Jane and Bill and everybody, and they figured it out, and we won the lawsuits, okay? Now it's time for the city to take control. And I'm going to tell you, I now live half my time down in Rancho Mirage, and in the last month, we've put up digital billboards in the city. But the billboard companies, one of them is Lamar down there, is paying 50 or 55% of the income back to, part of it's to the Indians, part is the city, and we're generating huge amounts of money to support it, and they're in the right locations. And you're seeing that in the small cities. Along the freeways, the Morongo Indians just changed their contract and went to CBS, and I believe that they're getting 55%. And tasteful digitals are nice. There's nothing wrong with them in the right spot. Sure, they're wrong when they're all over the West LA and things like that. And when you talk about the parks, you take the 170 freeway. North Hollywood Park goes like 5 miles down that freeway. Well, the billboards would be facing the freeway, and they rent for $100,000 a month. So if we got $50,000 a month for each billboard, you know, you got to wake up to the fact that, I mean, the buses have ads on them, cars have the ads on them, we got trailers on the streets, and yet the billboard companies are making millions, and the city's not saying anything, and there's nothing wrong with it. Plus the fact, like, I mean, I can tell you, CBS are wonderful people. They give us, as Paul knows, they give us the CBS Studio Center almost every night for community groups and charity events that we're able to use for free if it's a good group. And anyway, and I think that that you need it to promote the studios and other things.
Sir.
Thank you.
Jacqueline, good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm Jacqueline Kerr, member of the Planning Zoning Committee of the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council. We sent a letter off to you all last week in November concerning the problems that we have with the idea of the trust fund and the transparency problems that do not seem to be addressed with this. So far, there's no way of reporting this. There's a very simple way to do it. And it's already there, the system, the ENS system. An accountant can put this up on a monthly basis. Anybody who subscribes to the ENS Plum will get it. Whether they want it or not, they'll get it. And there should be no further problems with that or accusations of lack of transparency. For myself, I'd like to ask that any donation that is over $2,500, as I understand it, is supposed to go before the City Council, come before this committee first. That the projects of any donor making a donation of over $2,500 be expressed. Donations, projects that they would have in the future be examined and questioned and placed into comment by the public. Again, we're talking transparency. Please do consider this, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr. And Gwen, Joseph F. Young, and Donald Seligman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ann Wynn with the Central City Association. I will keep my comments short since it seems this might be a long hearing this afternoon. Central City Association's diverse membership includes a substantial number of developers, property owners, commercial and residential brokers, and land use consultants all across Los Angeles, but particularly in downtown. Several of our concerns have already been addressed in the latest draft, so I'm just going to highlight a few of our remaining concerns. First, we still feel that the proposed minimum size of SUDs is too large. A minimum of 5,000 linear feet or 15 acres limits the ability to be flexible about where SUDs would enhance the urban experience. A change is required, and we strongly support Councilmember Perry's letter and her request to reduce the SUD size and the linear foot requirements for the downtown housing incentive area. We also ask that you modify the definitions of on- and off-site signs to allow for cross-promotions. Many businesses use these types of signs to increase foot traffic within their businesses, and allowing for cross-promotional signs would enhance the business opportunities for our businesses. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Stand-in Chair at the moment. My name is Joe Young, and I'm representing the Angeles chapter of the Sierra Club, which has over 40,000 members throughout Los Angeles and Orange counties. Our concerns about the proliferation of billboards throughout the city, and especially in our parks, were expressed in a letter sent to each of you on September the 27th. But we still have those same concerns in the current draft of the sign ordinance before you. Language in the current draft, specifically section 14.4.4, paragraph O, would open the door for signage in city parks. This language, beginning with the word unless, must be removed. The sign ordinance must make it clear with unambiguous language that signage, including billboards, cannot be allowed in our parks. In addition, allowing entities operating within Griffith Park, such as the zoo, to exempt themselves from a prohibition against signage would completely undermine efforts to keep this park sign-free. Once the zoo is allowed to erect billboards or other signage, what's to stop other entities operating within the park from applying for exemptions? And what about entities operating within other parks? This exemption must not be allowed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Donald Seligman, President of the Los Feliz Improvement Association, and I speak for thousands of Los Feliz residents. The Los Feliz Improvement Association commends the committee and the planning department for addressing many of our concerns. Nevertheless, some very important issues remain. The Los Feliz community was recently appalled to learn that the city administrative officer has formally requested an amendment to allow the Los Angeles Zoo to apply to become a sign district. That a park venue could even entertain gaining unfettered off-site signage opportunities, including billboard advertising, by being allowed to become a sign district speaks directly to the necessity for retaining the current prohibition against sign districts and comprehensive sign programs in city parks without exception. We are also concerned that the addition of a community benefit offset option will open the process to interpretation and not ensure true reduction in off-site signage. We support a mandatory takedown of at least 1-to-1 in addition to a community benefit. We also continue to oppose the grandfathering in of non-compliant existing signs that are as much as 20% larger than permitted. Similarly, we urge you to reverse the grandfathering in of the 14 proposed sign districts that are not yet so designated to ensure that they are subject to all the requirements in the current proposed ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three speakers are David Garfinkel, Barry Johnson, and Richard Adams.
I'm David Garfinkel, President of the Tarzana Property Owners Association, and I echo a lot of the things that you've heard and will hear today, and over the 100 comments at the October 18th hearing, and if you go on to the public comments page of the ordinance section of the city's ordinance tracing program. I think that basically there are two things. One is many months ago, 2 years ago in fact, the City Planning Commission came out with a pretty good sign ordinance. We've chipped away at that each time we've had a revision and a new hearing. And I think that we need to really go back to the original CPC ordinance and make minor changes to it. A couple of specifics. We think there is no justification at all for a comprehensive sign program. We're against grandfathering. We believe that you must retain the right of private action. You heard the question about math of 2-to-1 versus 1-to-1. I'm a physicist and I agree with the fact that that's not math. We don't see the use of public benefits. It's certainly not quantifiable. It's open to too much interpretation on the spot. Believe that there should be no adjustment for oversight signs. It must go through a permitting process. And we believe you should dismantle all non-permitted sign. Finally, the idea of the idea of a fund for a sign unit, if that allows contributions from the sign industry, is absurd. How can you allow an industry that's being...
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Hi, Barry Johnson, Studio City Residents Association. And I first just wanted to mention that Lisa Sarkin of the Studio City Neighborhood Council wanted to be here today. She had a business emergency, but she wanted to point out the Studio City Neighborhood Council's community impact statement, 1 of 13. On today's ordinance. For the Studio City Residents Association, we do not support the current sign district grandfathering. Most of these sign districts that would be grandfathered, if not all, are adjacent to single-family home neighborhoods. We call for the respect of these single-family home neighborhoods due to the glow and bright lights these sign districts represent. Speaking for myself, as you know, each of you council members get elected by a majority vote. Yet when it comes to policy matters like this ordinance, and specifically the grandfathering of sign districts, the majority somehow doesn't matter. Yet at the last meeting, 60 out of 70 people spoke in this room against the ordinance, most specifically the grandfathering of the sign districts. Some have said this is about jobs. I say there's enough public and private projects we could do in this city over the next 100 years to never ever have to erect another billboard. I think further, as far as sign districts in the LA Zoo, the zoo is a park. It's a park within Griffith Park. And the cries for money are there, but you know, let's get by until the economy improves. I don't prostitute my home to make more money in bad times. Let's not do it with our public facilities. Let's weather the storm. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Adams, citizen 13022 Ventura Boulevard, Studio City. As a native of Los Angeles, I would like to point out once again that Blade Runner was an apocalyptic view of our city's potential future, not a goal to be pursued with remorseless intensity. While I recognize and support the need and the right of the city's business community to thrive and prosper, that cannot occur at the cost of massive blight, light and visual pollution, and permanent damage to the quality of life of our fellow citizens. If I'd wanted to live in New York, Tokyo, or any other major city of the world that has chosen to allow the sort of signage this new proposed ordinance would allow, I'd move there. Since I have no desire to emigrate from my home, I strongly urge this committee to adopt the changes and additions included in the SCNC Community Impact Statement regarding this proposed ordinance. The citizens of this city have repeatedly expressed their desire to not be buried in a sea of billboards, and it's long past time that our government act in accordance with that will, rather than once again selling out our interests for 30 pieces of silver. No matter how much money you raise with these proposed things, that money will all be spent faster than it's brought in, just like it always has. That's how the city wound up broke to begin with. When we, the citizens, run out of money, we quit spending. It's time. That's what's called real life. It's time the city came back to real life with its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Brendan Huffman next, and Jessica Pagneman. And then we'll have Phil Wright. So Brendan Huffman, Jessica Parkman, and Phil Wright. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Brendan Huffman, and I'm a volunteer and a coach at Toluca Baseball. And we have a lot of concerns about this ordinance because we have signs and banners at our field, which is in CD4. And we're not talking about billboards. We're just talking about banners and signs that acknowledge some of the local businesses that support our league. We're talking about banners that acknowledge and recognize kids who've done very well on the field, coaches and volunteers who've helped promote youth sports throughout the city. So hopefully there's a way that you can figure out how to address youth sports throughout the city so that they're not covered by this very broad sign ordinance, so that we can continue supporting our youth, taking care of our fields, which are also city facilities, and really improving the quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jessica Parkman, and thank you for your work with the Little League. Thank you for your work with the Little League.
Good afternoon, council members. Jessica Pacteman with Craig Lawson and Company at 8758 Venice Boulevard. I want to thank planning staff for their efforts on this ordinance and for developing a transition rule for pending sign districts. I do, however, continue to have concerns with the grandfathering language. As you may know, I represent the Figueroa and Olympic Sign District, which is one of the two only sign districts that the Commission approved originally in December 2008 for grandfathering. Our specific block has provided extensive sign reduction and community benefits consistent with the intent of the sign reduction requirements in the draft citywide ordinance and meets what Mr. Bell references as the worldwide rush test. However, the way the language is currently written in the draft citywide ordinance would preclude us from receiving any credit for our specific sign reduction program. More details about our concerns and requested changes has been submitted today in a letter from Craig Lawson, and we would greatly appreciate your committee's consideration of our requests. We are also in support of Councilmember Perry's position to reduce the minimum size thresholds for new sign districts, which would be appropriate for dense urban areas like downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Phil, there you go. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Phil Recht, represents Summit Media. Just want to speak in support of a modest amendment that's been added to this draft, and that is the extension of the sign adjustment relief mechanism to off-site signs. This was a consensus item at the last meeting. It's been included here. It's important for two reasons. One, it provides the small companies like Summit with somewhat equivalent rights to the largest companies that control 95% of the market, the rights they have in their settlement agreements. And secondly, it makes sure that neither the city nor the small companies have to spend the limited resources arguing over minor non-compliances that matters that have never really been the source of community concern or controversy. Just to be clear about what this proposal does not do, it doesn't allow any new billboards to be erected. It doesn't provide relief for any billboard that was erected without a permit. It doesn't allow any existing billboard that has a permit to be altered now. This only really deals with conditions that existed prior to 2002, and then it only allows them on a finding the conditions compatible with the surrounding environment. And finally, it doesn't allow any existing billboard to be converted to digital. So this is a very modest proposal, but it accomplishes two important goals. It levels the playing field and ensures the city's limited enforcement resources are really going to be available to weed out the egregious violations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I want to ask Mario Ramsey if you'd like to speak now, or did you want to wait till the end? You want to speak now?
Hi, good afternoon. Marie Rumsey here on behalf of Councilwoman Jan Perry, and I did submit a letter to the committee, and I wanted to highlight two requests that were made in that letter. One is the reduction of the threshold for sign districts in the greater downtown housing incentive area, and the second is regarding cross promotion and asking that there be a provision made within this ordinance for cross promotion with on-site signs. And I'm available to answer any questions.
Okay. Okay, go through this and we'll get back.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Janet Turner, Marion Dodge, and Douglas Hanson. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Janet Turner, Chair of Pacific Palisades Community Council. We are part of the coalition of NCs and CCs who have worked diligently on this, making improvements on this ordinance, and this draft has many positive changes, and we applaud planning for this. However, we still have major reservations, and for the sake of the children of Los Angeles, we have submitted a letter with 6 specific concerns that are detailed with suggestions on how to address them. They include cumulative sign illumination, not just per sign, but if there are several signs together, how much is that going to be affecting the area? As has been discussed, mandatory takedown requirements, and more consideration on allowing a large number of sign districts and more sign districts, in particular in threatening the preservation of residential neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles. And of course, we continue to say, preserve the parks, preserve the parks, preserve the parks for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Marion Dodge, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Marion Dodge, president of the Federation of Hillside and Canyon Associations, which represents 200,000 constituents, and 34 homeowner associations spanning the Santa Monica Mountains. While the sign ordinance has made much progress, there are still some changes that must be made. The sign ordinance must assure that there is a net reduction in the number of billboards throughout the city. The takedown provision must be mandatory and in addition to, not as an option to, the community benefit program. The only meaningful community benefit is a reduction in the number of signs. Additionally, the sign ordinance must absolutely prohibit off-site signs in city parks and on city property. The loophole on page 20, no off-site sign shall be allowed in any park or other facility owned by the City of Los Angeles unless such sign is allowed within a sign district, must be deleted. The recent request for a sign district in the Los Angeles Zoo is particularly disturbing because the zoo's primary clientele is toddlers to 10-year-olds, a very vulnerable group dependent on responsible adults like those of us in this room for their protection. Advertising must be prohibited in the zoo, which is located entirely within the boundaries of Griffith Park, which is also an historic cultural monument. The Los Angeles Times editorial on December 3rd is correct. Billboards and parks do not mix. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Douglas Hanson. I'm an architect in Los Angeles, and I'm here to, in general, support the sign ordinance that's written. There's one of the conditions of the requirements for an SUD. I've done a number of projects in downtown Los Angeles, and I think the threshold is a bit high. I think I have a pretty good understanding of scale in downtown, and we're actually working on a project right now in the Fashion District that's very large, and it's 3 city blocks, and we can't make that number. So I think that, we need to please consider a reduction and more along the lines of Jan Perry's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Paul Rohr, Camilla Aglian, apologize for mispronouncing your name, and Dennis Hathaway.
Good afternoon. I'm Paul Rohr, speaking in support of Councilmember Perry's proposal that the minimum number of linear feet of street frontage for SUDs be reduced to 2,640 in the downtown housing incentive area. Downtown is different from other areas in the city in that it provides people an opportunity to live, work, and play in a exciting urban core, and the proposed requirement of 5,000 linear feet is just too big for downtown. For example, I represent the city market, which is approximately 3 blocks in size, and even it does not qualify for an SUD under the proposed ordinance. Because the proposed ordinance prevents even large development sites from qualifying for an SUD, we respectfully request that it be revised by your committee so that 2,640 linear feet of street frontage qualifies for an SUD only in the downtown housing incentive area. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Camilla McLean, and then Dennis Hathaway. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm here because I have 3 kids, and every day I have to drive through the city and take them to school and different practices, and the amount of billboards and the inappropriate pictures they have to see every day is going out of control. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I don't want the billboards in parks. And I speak for a lot of moms. Every day, it doesn't go down like one day where people say, "Did you see the billboard? Did you see the billboard?" And we're so angry, and we're just really been calling billboard companies, writing them emails. And I also would like to see the reduction of billboards and also less billboards. Especially on Sunset Boulevard, where there's been almost nude pictures on a regular basis, and also there's I can't even express how inappropriate it is for these billboard companies to put these pictures up, and they're rated R pretty much, and on the verge of being X-rated, and they really should be rated G. These children are in the cars, they're walked to school, and lately there have been very inappropriate billboards next to churches and the library and schools, and even in Studio City as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Dennis Hathaway?
Good afternoon, council members. I'm not going to repeat what other people have said, just to suffice to say that I agree with those who have spoken from the community about protecting public parks and facilities and about billboard takedown and other matters. I just want to address two things. One is the sign adjustment for off-site signs. A full-size billboard is 672 square feet. The legal limit for height is 42 feet. A 20% adjustment would make that billboard over 800 square feet and a little over 50 feet high. Obviously, a 800 square foot billboard that's 50 foot high is much more visible and much more valuable to an advertiser. What justification, please tell me, what justification is there for allowing a billboard company that put up a billboard that violated the conditions of its permit or that was modified in violation of its permit to do that? I just don't understand. I wish someone would tell me. The other thing is the grandfathered sign districts. The sign district, or the sign that was grandfathered for, or proposed to be grandfathered for James Wood Boulevard on the property of the Plumbers Local 78. In 2008, the city attorney filed criminal charges against the property owner, the sign installer, for putting up a billboard almost literally in the middle of the night, a double-sided billboard right smack alongside the Harbor Freeway that violates the height limits, and to have that property included to be grandfathered in this ordinance is kind of a slap in the face to the city attorney and the public. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. John Gibbon, and Beth Gordy, and Barbara Broyd. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. John Gibbon, 2551 La Condesa Drive in Brentwood. I'm speaking on behalf of myself today and also the Brentwood Residents Coalition, as their representative couldn't attend. So first, thanks for another opportunity to address the committee. And I want to especially thank Alan Bell and Daisy Moe. I think they've done an incredible job. It's been really hard for them, I think. They're hearing it from all sides, and all sides are not always happy, so that probably means they're doing something right. Despite their great work, we do have some remaining concerns. A number of them have already been mentioned. I'd like to echo, in particular, Dennis Hathaway's comment regarding the variance. There doesn't seem to be any particular justification for that variance that I can find. I'd also like to echo the call for net reduction, takedown plus community benefits, not and/or, and as well as the concern about the parks that so many people have mentioned already. In addition, many have discussed the grandfathering. I won't go into detail except to say that I agree generally with those remarks. I would like to talk about the comprehensive sign programs very briefly. Previously, there was a 10% limitation on off-site. There really doesn't seem to be any justification for that to me, and now there's no ceiling on it whatsoever. I'd like to go at least back to the 10%, if not no off-site at all. Finally, 2 points that have not been raised. The new administrative appeal process that's been added, section 14.4.27. I don't see the need for it, frankly. I think that no appeal process is needed. The penalties should be as they are. And I'd also call for a clarification of the language in the ordinance to ensure that the buffer zone for scenic highways remains 500 feet as it is. That would be consistent across a variety of other issues, including the Los Angeles River Overlay Zone. Very briefly, if I could, I'd like to address the Little League concern, because I believe that the...
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Chairman Reyes and council members, I'm Beth Gordy with Latham & Watkins. We support staff's technical correction related to interior signs. The code currently states, and your committee has provided consistent direction, that interior signs, such as those at shopping centers, sports stadiums, and studios, should not be regulated by the code's exterior sign provisions. These signs are truly interior. They are not visible from the public right-of-way and any property other than the property. In addition, these interior signs are subject to illumination provisions, including automatic brightness sensors, which will address any light impacts to nearby residential properties. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Wood, after you would be Stephen Resnick, but go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Brady, Westwood, south of Santa Monica Boulevard, also a member of the Westside Neighborhood Council that has submitted a community impact statement opposing the ordinance as currently crafted. I will agree with many of the statements, most of the statements raised by the community regarding parks, the zoo, mandatory removal. It seems strange to me, quite honestly, that this city, which has great power and is considering granting significant entitlement rights to outdoor advertisers, that this city cannot hold the line on the intent and spirit of the 2002 sign ordinance. This ordinance may meet the quote-unquote legal requirements, but it does not meet the intent nor the spirit of the city, which was to seek a reduction in signage. So we ask that you do a Howie Mandel and you do deal or no deal test, and you say to yourselves, reduction must be met. It's 1-to-1 at minimum. We'd say 2-to-1. 2-to-1. 1-to-1 if you give community benefits. We understand the need for community benefits. The city is not in a position to be transformed to beggars. They should insist you are giving valuable entitlements. Secondly, on the fines, to have appeals on the fines is to reduce the ability of the city to have compliance and enforcement. This industry has demonstrated a disregard for the law for many years. They have brought this city to their knees with constant litigation. The fines must be strong because there must be a deterrence. Otherwise, fines are merely the cost of doing business. And if it goes before an administrative hearing, well, who knows what will happen? The citizens are tired of having to come down and fight and enforce and have to counter all of the exceptions that are written into laws. This ordinance has many loopholes. We know where they came from. We just can't seem to get our foot in the door despite many city council hearings, many CPC hearings, and we would like to see it hold the line. We implore you to be strong.
Thank you, ma'am.
Give us what we need.
Thank you, ma'am. Stephen Resnick.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Stephen Resnick, President of the Westwood Homeowners Association and also Secretary of the Westwood Neighborhood Council. You already have our impact statement and other statements opposing the ordinance, and I would just like to reiterate what my colleagues have already said, that there are too many holes in the revised ordinance. We already talked about 2 up and 1 down, mandatory takedown, grandfathering, all these sign districts is certainly not acceptable. And then we turn again to advertising in the parks. That was tried in Holmby Park and failed miserably, and the Rec and Parks ran for cover over that, and now we turn that around, and now we have the zoo. I would suggest to you that this is just not good enough for the city of Los Angeles. It's not the best work, and we simply have to be able to do better than this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Richard Spicer, Nancy Friedman, and then Carol Henning. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm representing the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council. My name is Richard Spicer. As you know, we presented letters and CISs in 2009, 2011. We would prefer, of course, the CBC version. We would support what was said by the Los Feliz Improvement Association and Dennis regarding parks, regarding this very latest grandfather. And then I want to speak to a couple of things in the current draft. I've gone through the entire draft. It's very hard for me to find, and this is in your hands today and in the planning department, that there will be a guaranteed communication to the public and to neighborhood councils on all the proposed changes that go on in this ordinance. Districts, signs, adjustments, community benefits. All of those have possibility to affect the neighborhood and open things up more widely. They need to be defined in the cover letter and in the ordinance. The staff tells me it's there somewhere in an article. That's not good enough. We've been saying this for 3 years. Thank you, and there's still more. In this new provision, there needs to be definitions for some of these terms, especially downtown, like blight, blight reduction, aesthetics improvement, because in those areas, historically blighted, economically pivotal, what do those terms mean? In those two districts, anything goes so long as it meets these very general standards. Nobody knows what that means. So that needs to be improved. Plus, hardly anybody in this room, I think, can visualize what some of these roof signs, digital signs, supergraphics mean, and the height standards without a visual illustration. That would help immensely.
Thank you very much.
Maps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Friedman. I represent the Brentwood Community Council of 350 million people. And I just wanted to see if you were listening. I guess you were. End of story.
Is that before or after the council meeting?
Do you know that people don't really read signs? There's a study on that, and they sort of glaze through them. So as far as what the message is to us, it's not all that important. I do just want to ask you a few things. I ask that you admire the dedication of the constituents who have spent countless hours studying this ordinance and who have done their research and who represent diverse LA communities as seen via letters, testimony, and physically showing up for hearings at great inconvenience and no pay, all in the name of justice. Please do not take this lightly. And also, please don't compare Los Angeles to other cities. I really think it's time, as we've seen with Occupy LA, where they really did a good job of clearing the park, I think it's time that we handle our own situation and not worry about what other cities have done. So I appreciate that we are coming to an agreement and this ordinance is beginning to take shape and really look like it can work. And finally, I guess for philosophy, if nothing else, the LA Times editorial December 3rd got it right. Should LA be a city out to bid to sell Los Angeles on the cheap? Simply a bleak cityscape of sign, are you listening? Sign after sign, on block after block, mile after very block. Is advertising an alternate revenue source to fix potholes, put in a few new sidewalks and new parks with more signs? No. You know that, we all know that, and the future depends on your concern to prevent that. It's okay to come down on the side of the law for the people of LA. Thank you very much for your time.
Loud and clear. Carol Henning, good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Carol Henning. I'm on the executive committee of the Angeles chapter of the Sierra Club and also Friends of Griffith Park. Now, I've been sitting here looking around at this beautiful room, and I've noticed there's a lot of blank space on the walls here, and I'm thinking, revenue opportunities, you could get a lot of billboards in
We'll get all the credit for that.
Okay, however, I am a person who respects public places, and therefore, I oppose the loophole created by the off-site signs in city parks and facilities provision, quote, unless such sign is allowed within a sign district established pursuant to section 113.11 of this code. There are 16 proposed sign districts grandfathered into the ordinance. This provision can be used to justify selling advertising in parks and other public facilities. This is wrong. Moreover, I oppose the request to allow the LA Zoo to have its own sign district. The zoo is a public facility wholly situated within another public facility, Griffith Park. Allowing commercial signage at the zoo will set a bad precedent for other entities within parks. Public parks are sanctuaries for ordinary people.
Commercial billboards have no place in them. Thank you, and thanks for the 2 minutes.
Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, Sarah Neubauer will write, and Samantha Martinez. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and other members. Sally Neubauer, representing the Citizens Committee to Save Elysian Park. I think you know what I'm going to say. No signs in parks, please. No signs in public facilities, please. Our parks are refuges for nature, for a refuge from getting mind blasted by all the media that's out there every second of every day. And we do not need more signs in parks and public facilities. Furthermore, we are opposed to the signage at Griffith Park Zoo. Other people have said how we are in hard times, and there's no doubt about that. And other people have said they don't prostitute their homes. And I feel the same way, that we shouldn't prostitute our parks and our public facilities, and we should protect our young children, our impressionable young adults, and give them a beautiful experience that they deserve in a park or a public facility. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Will Wright and Samantha Martinez.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Wright. I work for the American Institute of Architects, and we're here to voice our commendations. I think we've been working with the planning department on this for about 4 or 5 years, and we really do respect the work that they put into this and the effort and the leadership. A few concerns. We do think with the sign districts, we do need to look at if one goes up, perhaps 2 go down, or community benefits for 1-to-1. My big question, really, when we come about, because a lot of this is talking about the economy, and I think the AIA doesn't necessarily have a track record for the history of the economy, but I think we have a nice perspective when it comes to design. If we look at our city, overall, economically and also environmentally, the big picture, what will attract more revenue? That's my question. I think the more beautiful and the more inspirational we can make this city, the more we can all operate our budgets efficiently. And I don't think that signage revenue is really going to incrementally get us there. I think the only way we're going to get there long term is to have the most beautiful and the most inspirational city possible. Thank you.
That's right. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Samantha Martinez, and I represent the Greater LA New Car Dealers Association. First of all, I want to thank this committee and staff for all the hard work on this draft ordinance. We're members of the On-Site Sign Coalition, and we agree with the comments in Councilwoman Jan Perry's letter. We're very concerned about the ability to do cross-promotion to get folks into our dealerships, as well as there are many small businesses and large businesses around LA that are concerned as well about having the ability to cross-promote and get folks into our businesses. So we respectfully request that that staff works with us and crafts language that would allow us the ability to continue to cross-promote with our on-site signs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Gail Rogers, Barry Baker, and Bernadette Soder.
Hi, I'm Gail Rogers, a resident of Venice Beach. On November 15th, I committed an act of civil disobedience. Councilmember Jan Perry came to speak before the Venice Neighborhood Council because she has declared her candidacy for mayor and wanted to meet us. We knew that she was in favor of for-profit signage, so we made handheld signs like parks or sanctuaries. Advertising for revenue in parks is moral bankruptcy, no ads on Oceanfront Walk, and we held them up when she was introduced. She wasn't planning to address her support of advertising in parks, but felt she had to when she saw our signs. What I interpreted from what she said was that her district had poor people. So Jan Perry said for-profit signage in parks was appropriate for them. But in the more affluent Venice, she would help us opt out of this commercial signage. Well, we have poor people in Venice also, and they don't want corporate logos on the ocean front in our park. Parks are sanctuaries for everyone, even the poor. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Baker, no? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Bernadette Soder. I live at 2640 North Commonwealth Avenue, and I'm here speaking on behalf of Friends of Griffith Park. We were all present at the October 18th hearing when we heard your panel direct the planning department to come back with an ordinance that had no loopholes in it vis-a-vis advertising in parks. You've heard from many people about the loophole on page 20 that begins with the word unless and includes the word sign district for parks and public facilities. So, of course, we're asking you to remove that. On Friday, the zoo stepped up to demonstrate what a tempting loophole that is by applying to be a sign district, and we're asking you to oppose that amendment as well. The zoo is a public facility and a public park. The park it is in is Griffith Park. Griffith Park is also an LA City Historic Cultural Monument and a LA County significant ecological area. That's two more reasons why we would not want a sign district in that park. But Friends of Griffith Park opposes sign districts in all our city parks. This is not just about Griffith Park. I'm a product of South LA, and I grew up recreating in Denker Playground, Normandy Rec Center, and Exposition Park. I recreated in an advertising-free environment, which means that I did not have to feel badly that I couldn't purchase the licensed character toy, except I don't think there were any when I grew up, go to the movie, buy the soft drink or the snack that my parents couldn't afford. I was free to explore my own creativity, to dream my own dreams in those environments, and to not feel a diminution in my self-esteem because we didn't have a lot of money. Let's allow kids in these areas, and I'm referring back to Gail, who just spoke about poor versus not poor, have that too. That leads to personal growth. Friends of Griffith Park, for the record, is not opposed to Youth Sports League banners. Friends of Griffith Park is not opposed to donor recognition walls, and we point to the Los Angeles Public Library as an excellent example of how to handle that. We would like very much to work with the Recreation and Parks Department to make sure a policy is established both for non-advertising and Little League sponsor banners and donor walls that suits everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Rosemary DeMonte, Martha Navarro, and James Carpenter. You're welcome to come on up as well. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm Rosemary DeMonte. I'm on the Greater Griffith Park Planning Committee, Zoning Committee, and I want to commend all the people here today that have been very nice and very polite to you and to the Planning Department, but I am not one of those today. I am very upset that we've been here so many times begging you, pleading with you, asking you to listen to our concerns, and we come back to this and we find what's going on again today. The second speaker today gave a great idea. He said, get all the money you can get from the sign companies and put it into the city coffers. And this way, these poor agencies don't have to beg for the kindness of strangers. The city should be getting all the money in their coffers from these sign companies, not in campaign coffers. It should be directly to the city, and we should be getting every dime they can give us because they're making buku bucks, and obviously they know how to spend it. And I would love to still say that the fact that you're taking away the individual's right to be able to safeguard the quality of his life and the property value he has from these obliterating signs blinking on his property is absolutely unfair. When you're letting them appeal for their fines, why can't a homeowner appeal to the indiscretion of sign districts? I'm sorry. I really am sorry that I have said this to you, and I hope that you understand that I really expect better from the city to protect its community. And the 99% are not being heard. It's the 1% here, and I hope that the 99%, I'll do everything I can to get them out to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Robert Navarro, James Carpenter, and Stuart Waldman. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Councilman Reyes and the Plum members. I'm Barbara Navarro, speaking on behalf of the California Sign Association and also on behalf of San Pedro Electric Sign Company. We are located in the city of Los Angeles, Wilmington to be specific. First, we thank you for your leadership in protecting on-site business signs, though we do have a few key points to make regarding the sign ordinance. The proposed minimum area for sign districts is excessive. Planning's proposal is a 5-fold increase up to 15 acres. This change is unnecessary and ties the hands of the council members to decide what is best for their own district. We support Councilwoman Perry's request and ask that you apply the same changes citywide. Additionally, a limit of 4,500 daytime candelas is too restrictive and would result in limited visibility during the day. To our understanding, people are not concerned with electronic message center brightness in the daytime. The appropriate cap on daytime brightness is 0.3-foot candelas above ambient lighting conditions, which should be regulated by automatic dimmers. We ask that you modify the definitions of on- and off-site signs to allow businesses to cross-promote. And finally, we ask that you include the sign code administration program, which will increase revenues for sign enforcement and permit streamlining to the work program for the sign unit. Thank you for your consideration, and thank you for the work you do in attracting and growing business in the city of LA.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker.
Hello, James Carpentier here with on behalf of the International Sign Association, Alexandria, Virginia. And I'm here to talk about the illumination levels that you have recommended in the proposed code for digital signs, and I represent the on-premise sign industry only. The code proposes two methodologies for maximum digital sign brightness, nits and foot candles. To minimize confusion and really ensure accuracy, we're recommending that the City of Los Angeles adopt one methodology versus two that's currently in the code. The nits methodology measures the amount of light emitting from a sign but does not indicate how bright the sign is to the human eye. As indicated previously, that what's proposed in the code will not function well right now, in our opinion. Therefore, the recommendation that we have is based upon a study that utilizes the accepted practice by the Illumination Engineering Society of North America, IESNA. The recommended foot candle method takes into account ambient light to ensure safe and effective illumination levels for digital signs. In addition, to determine compliance with the foot candle regulations, it's really straightforward for industry and for the city. It's very simple, which is critical. In addition, the foot candle methodologies, it's also been adopted by a number of communities and has been very successful throughout the country. Our recommendations, as indicated by Mr. Bell, it follows the proposed standards that are already in the code for residential districts, so this is a conservative recommendation, but one that we know will function well. And thank you for your consideration very much.
Thank you, sir. We have Stuart Waldman, Marion Sue, I believe, and Sharon Kaiser, and then Wolfgang Wieth. Good afternoon, sir.
Hello, council members. I'm Stuart Waldman. I'm president of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA, representing over 370 businesses who've created over 100,000 jobs. We wish to first thank the Planning Department for their tireless work on this ordinance. They've addressed several of our concerns with only a few outstanding issues. VICA maintains that the proposed minimum area for a sign district is far too excessive, particularly for areas in the San Fernando Valley. We support Councilmember Perry's proposal to cut the 5,000 feet requirement in half for downtown, but request that the new requirement be enforced citywide. We are also concerned about the definitions of on- and off-site signs, which eliminate the potential for cross-promotion, a necessary advertising tool in this strapped economy. While we understand the Planning Department's concerns about loopholes, we request that the City Attorney address this issue to ensure a definition that fulfills both neighborhood concerns and industry needs. Regarding digital signs, we appreciate that the Planning Department has worked with us on the brightness standards. We strongly support inclusion of automatic dimmer technology that ensures sign brightness does not exceed 0.3 candelas above ambient lighting conditions. With these sensors in place, the daytime candela limit becomes unnecessary, and we strongly urge the removal or significant increase of the daytime restriction. Finally, we fully support the establishment of a sign unit to address areas left out of the ordinance and the inclusion of an advisory board that includes industry leaders. If there are defined issues and defined time frame for the resolution of these issues, without these parameters, we are not certain that this unit will be fully funded and, most importantly, successful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Marion, LSU, are you here? Okay, we'll move on. Sharon Kaiser? The Wolfgang Vieth. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Sharon Kaiser with Paramount Pictures. Thank you for your continued consideration of this. We have just two requests. One, to state again our ask that the grandfathering date be extended October 18th so that our master plan that was filed under today's rules can be processed under today's rules. And secondly, on the findings, the worldwide rush findings for sign reduction and community benefits, we would ask that you follow staff's recommendation number 1 that would allow the council maximum flexibility on each case as those signage plans come before you through their public review process. Thank you.
Thank you. Wolfgang Vieth, then we'll have Beverly Kenworthy, then Steve Sand, and that should conclude the hearing. Good afternoon, sir.
Wolfgang Veit from the North Westwood Village Residents Association. I came to Los Angeles in 1969, and ever since then I've noticed how Los Angeles gets uglier and uglier and uglier because there's more signs and more signs and more billboard and denser and denser and denser. This is ridiculous. It is outrageous. It really detracts from Los Angeles as a city that is a visitor magnet. You can see that, and I saw that yesterday by driving north on La Cienega Boulevard towards Beverly Hills. Signs over signs over signs, up and down, right and left. You come across the border, Beverly Hills, no signs. Pleasant to the eye as you drive through Beverly Hills, and you get past the border, signs right, left, up, down, right. It's a cacophony of signs that don't serve anybody because you don't look at them anymore. You try to avoid them. We are assaulted by these signs just for the benefit of 1% who makes money off signs. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Beverly Kenworthy, Steve Sam, and that should conclude the hearing. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, council members. Beverly Kenworthy with the LA Chamber of Commerce. First, I will echo our support of the comments made by our friends at CCA and at VICA. And also, I just want to make a few points of clarification. For the internal signs at public facilities, we want to make sure that, LAX and places like that depend on this type of revenue, that's explicitly clarified in the code. We also support Councilmember Perry's request for the reduction of the sign district in the greater downtown area, as well as really concerned about this, making sure that cross-promotion is allowed. We know that, for instance, the automotive industry really relies on that, but if you look around, you'll see a lot of our nonprofits here in the city do too, and they depend on that money to help keep them going. I'd also like to say that echo the comments about the daytime level brightness for the digital signs, and also to talk about the grandfather clause. I think we need to have a date that more accurately reflects where we are in the process. Ideally we would have liked to have been done way back in October, but clearly that hasn't happened, and so create some uncertainty. We just want to make sure that, when we put in a date, that it reflects kind of where we're going.
I thought you were going to say 2002.
Well, I remember back then.
Okay.
Too, so. Anyway, thank you very much.
All right. Okay, Steve Sam.
Thank you very much, council members, for this, your attention through this lengthy hearing. This is my third time here in this very room on this very subject, and want to appreciate the opportunity to address you again. It should be very apparent to all of you, and I think to the entire council, this is a matter of grave concern citywide, from the east side to the west side, Hollywood, the Valley, downtown, and so on. You've heard from so many people, from so many communities, rich and poor, and everyone in between. There must be a reason why people are so passionate about this issue, and I know you have heard from many of us. I have to address a couple points. One, I'm an alumnus of UCLA undergrad and law school, and David Geffen gave us the largest gift in our school's history, $200 million, the naming gift for our medical school. Do you know what he got for that, ladies and gentlemen? He has his name in about 4-inch high letters in the donor wall of honor in the courtyard on our campus. He also has his name tastefully on the medical school building. When I hear Mr. Muckery of the Parks and Recs Department saying that we need to recognize our donors, let me tell you what that meant to the Parks Department. They wanted to take our park, Holmby Park, and plaster every bench, every canopy, every trash can, every structure you can name, practically the blades of grass themselves, with Yogi Bear signs to thank Warner Brothers for some $40,000 or $20,000 contribution, masquerading as advertising, calling it donor recognition. You all know the difference. Go to the library, as was noted. We know what, when someone gives you $1 million at the music center, you get your name about this big. You don't get logos plastered over everything. Yes, we're in difficult times. Absolutely. I'm a business owner. We're all trying to meet the bottom line and keep our employees employed. But this city has been in difficult times before. We've been through the Great Depression, and our city fathers and mothers, thank God, did not give away Griffith Park, did not give away the observatory, did not give away the zoo, because we have it today. And your legacy is how you're going to deal with this today. And I urge you to keep your heads on and follow the gentleman from Rancho Mirage and figure out why our city doesn't get our fair share of this revenue.
Thank you very much. Okay. That concludes public hearing. Public hearing is closed. And Council Wieser, any observations or questions for the staff? But before we go there, I just want to thank the staff for their hard work, planning staff and building and safety, the city attorney's office. I've been working hard on this, and again, trying our best to stay within the legal parameters of the courts, maintaining consistency, while still trying to address as many of the concerns of the stakeholders around this issue. So that being said, Councilor Wieser, any observations, comments, or questions?
I have a question for staff. Can you walk me through the issue or the concern raised by some of the speakers regarding the word unless on page 20, and whether you agree or disagree with the assessment made by some of the speakers that that word would make the rest of that section moot?
I'd be happy to. I mean, that provision has to be read in the context in terms of what is allowed within the part of the code that allows sign districts themselves. So they have to be read in conjunction with each other. So three things. When you look at all of those different code provisions, you put them together, the only places where you would be allowed to have an off-site sign in a city facility are specifically the LAX International Airport, and that is because that specific plan for the airport allows the airport to file for a sign district, and in fact, LAX has already filed for a sign district. Number two, the Port of Los Angeles, and that was always been in our draft and is analogous to LA International Airport. And then finally, the way the ordinance is structured, it would allow, yes, it would allow within the downtown area establishment of sign districts for properties that are zoned public facilities. That would include the convention center. It could include any city facility that is zoned within the downtown area, PF, and that could include parks that are within the downtown area. Mm-hmm. If we wanted to exclude parks within downtown, then we would have to make a distinction, let's say, between the convention center, when there is an application in connection with Farmers Field, for example, for a sign district in that area, and make a distinction between that PF zone property and then other properties within downtown that are also have the same zoning.
So as you see it, it doesn't provide a loophole for advertisement at our parks? Again,
only within those three parameters that I just outlined.
Yeah.
It would not allow that.
Only those three, okay. And I think, the direction this committee gave at the last hearing was, and I think it was unanimous, that we didn't agree with advertisement at the parks, and I think you took that and included that there very clearly. And I don't think that that word necessarily provides a huge loophole, and only under those three very specific circumstances. So I think you took that direction to task and did that well. Thank you. Secondly, on the issue of the zoo, I haven't read the CAO report, but what's the rationale behind allowing a sign district for the zoo, and has the planning department looked at that, and what are your thoughts on the CAO report?
Well, again, I just want to clarify, based upon the current structure of the ordinance, the zoo would not be allowed off-site signage either through a sign district, the sign program, or the interior sign exceptions. So, as currently drafted, they would not be eligible under any mechanism within the ordinance to have off-site signage. It's purely a policy matter. I think that given the structure of the ordinance, it could be listed and called out as a specific eligible site to file for a sign district, but it would have to be very plain language that would call it out as such, in the same way that we have very plain language calling out that the port and LAX are allowed to have sign districts.
Now, would that open the doors for any advertisement around Griffith Park if we make it very specific to the zoo?
If you craft it very narrowly and just limit it to the zoo and the botanical gardens, and not include anything that would be outside the boundaries of the zoo. Again, we haven't studied this issue, but if we were given specific direction to limit it to the zoo proper and not outside the zoo to any areas or acreage that would be outside Griffith Park, we would follow that particular direction. But again, it's a policy matter.
Okay, thank you. And my other question for now is on the issue that Councilwoman Perry raised, which was to extend the linear street frontage of a project to qualify for a sign district. It's currently 5,000. How do we come up with a 5,000 linear feet? Why that number right now? Or why was that proposed?
Right. Obviously, we have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, but there are two basic reasons why we arrived at that number. Part of this has to do with the discussion that we had at the Planning Commission in terms of what is actually a district. And the Commission felt very strongly that if we were going to have sign districts, that they'd be an urban development tool, and that a block is not a district. If you're going to have a district, it needs to have several city blocks, and our analysis showed that 5,000 linear feet was equivalent of 3 to 4 city blocks, and that really is the minimum size that you need in order to have a sign district. Now, let's look at, in comparison to the Hollywood sign district. The Hollywood sign district exceeds that minimum threshold many, many, many times over. The LA Live has, again, far more linear foot than that minimum. So we feel that meets the policy goal of making sure that we actually have districts and that a block is not a district. A district has multiple city blocks. And then finally, there's a legal reason for that, which is we don't want to get into a position of granting an exception from the citywide sign ban and granting that exception to a single property owner. As you may recall, the last sign district that this council approved was Wilshire Grand, and there was a lot of discussion about that particular sign district, which was a one-block sign district, but the council also, in approving that particular recommendation, established what was called the Figueroa Corridor Sign Study Area, which was a much bigger area encompassing LA Live all the way up to the Wilshire Grand, and they adopted boundaries of that with the belief that we would study that as a potential larger sign district connecting Wilshire Grand all the way to LA Live. I would say that as a policy matter, that if the council or Plum wanted to consider a reduction in the size of a sign district, that the only place where it would make sense would be within the downtown area. That said, we still believe that our recommendation should be applied on a citywide basis.
And your reasoning for downtown is because of the density?
Because it is, there's no place else in the city of LA that is like downtown. It is unique, one of a kind, and because of the density of it, there also happens to be within downtown, unlike any place else, you have that density, you have that built-up urban environment that is nowhere else that is similar to that, except in downtown. And we have special rules and zoning regulations that apply only to downtown and do not apply anywhere else in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Well, just for a moment, I want to thank Councilor Rizal for, I'd like to interject for a second and invite Councilor Barnes to the microphone. And I know he has a statement to make.
A little statement to make. This is just a map. This is a map of our great city, as you all know, and those green spots represent our valued public space. As you can all see, public space is so important. And as someone spoke of earlier when they were here, and I'll do this, forgive me for turning my back to you, but someone made a very good point about this Public Works boardroom. You know, you could have Allied Paving over there, and you could have Transcontinental Cement over here, and Johnson Piping over there, but that's not what this space is for. This is a space for the Board of Public Works to come, named after the late, great Ed Roybal, who was one of the finest council members and congressional members for us. So this is what the state of this room should be. I've been listening to some of the comments. I want you to just go very cautiously when you go towards parks, because it's the one shot that you have. I've met with constituents who are very passionate, and we want to make sure we do the right thing. I know this extreme pressure Mr. Muckery is and their commission in trying to keep the parks open and trying to balance everything out. But I don't want to lose what we have in such a way that ruins what the experience is when you go into a park. We don't see this, to my knowledge, in the Angeles National Forest. Once you get into the Angeles National Forest, you are absolutely in the forest. And there's a value to when you get into nature. The same is true in our natural parks. I do support Little League, and I think if there's a combined banner size for the Little Leagues, I think that's important. But I know you have a tough job, Mr. Reyes, in trying to balance it out because your passion is with the people and as a designer. But on the park issue, I want you to go cautious. I don't know if our department has been able to study other municipalities, not just in the United States, but around the world, that finds a balance that doesn't destroy the natural look, but also complements what is the revenue charge that this comes from. And anything at the zoo should only be that would be educational or in the front end of the zoo, not in the parking lot or obstructing other parts of that expanse, which is part of Griffith Park. But if there's something in the interior of the zoo as you walk in, on a case-by-case basis, I can live with it.
Councilman Barnes, may I ask a question in that regard? You've been chairing Arts Committee for a few years,
right.
And we work a lot with the commissioners, advice from the Recreation and Parks Department. If they were given the flexibility to recommend what they feel is complementary to the park while trying to develop strategies for revenue generation, how would you respond to that? Because ultimately the definition and the detail does come from those who are there day to day.
Let me give a tough thought. The Art Deco of MacArthur Park, if they had a appropriate size sign, this is a tough one for me to even say this,
right,
that captured Wilshire Boulevard and the traffic on Wilshire Boulevard for some reason, but it's tough because you open up the area there. But I know that revenue would really help keep that park in shape and in use and staffed as you would want it. I could not see, though, any advertising of in Griffith Park in any appropriate area other than what is there now for the Greek Theater, what is there now for the limited activities for our boys and girls for golf and those programs and banners.
Right.
It would be very hard, and I would like to know what other cities have done.
Right, but I guess all I'm saying is that giving the commissioners the opportunity to recommend and suggest is someone we have to make a decision eventually. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I would like to see what other cities are doing. Absolutely. It's very difficult. It's very difficult because once you do this, and then how do you not do it? You know, how do you not do it and you do it right? I do think banners to encourage health and recreation on our sponsorship programs. I do think in gymnasiums with the hanging banners of the Pan Pacific champions is a great pride for that park or other parks like that. But we have to be extremely cautious because all of a sudden, you know, it comes another tale. I will end with one quick story. We got to find a way to get more alumni of parks to contribute to the foundation or to a park trust that goes for operating hours. Hugh Hauser did a story about the Red Shield in your district, and somebody saw it up the California line in San Luis Obispo and made a substantial donation that kept that place alive. Our parks have been great stories for many successes of many Angelenos, boys and girls, and that's the revenue we could try to find in a way there as opposed to selling out space.
Gotcha.
Anyway, we only got one shot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. I wanted to, are there more questions or observations you have?
Well, just one final question on the parks issue, which is, if I could ask staff, there was a gentleman who talked about signs that would be brought into parks by Little League to recognize the top players, perhaps even sponsors would be on those signs. Would those be prohibited under this language?
It depends upon whether or not it meets the definition of what we would call an on-site sign. If it crosses the line into advertising, then it would run afoul of that particular ban. This is getting into an area where, quite frankly, is above my pay grade, so I would ask my colleague in the city attorney's office to comment on it. But I believe that it is possible for that kind of sponsorship signs, government speech to be protected and not run afoul of the city's ban on off-site advertising.
Yes, Ken Funk, City Attorney's Office. Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Bell's saying about that. We have to look at the particular situation, but the danger always is when you have a sign and it ostensibly is for something like Little League, but it morphs into something a little bit more than that, where it's a true off-site sign, off-site commercial signage. And we have a devil of a time keeping our whole sign regulatory system consistent over all departments, all parts of the city, all 400 square miles and plus. So it's, even though they seem like sometimes innocuous exceptions, the First Amendment is so important that if you slip up on one piece of it, then, you may knock down the whole house of cards. I guess that's the way I sum it up.
But the language we currently have is that no off-site sign shall be allowed in any park or other facility owned by the city.
Yes.
So by that definition, the banners wouldn't fall under that definition.
Well, it's a case-by-case basis, but obviously if they actually have Little League in a park and it just says Little League tryouts and that sort of thing, then it's really just the government itself speaking. But I have seen signs where, there's sponsorship and that sort of thing, and then it may change into something else. So it really depends upon the particular sign. And, we in the city attorney's office and in the planning department, we've seen a lot of examples of this. We've worked with building and safety, and I can tell you it does become problematic at times.
So before we adopt this ordinance, how do we get more clarity instead of saying, we're going to say it's on a case-by-case basis?
Well, I would say that planning is attempting to put some clear limitations on these sort of things. And what they're saying is if you want to have true off-site signs, you can have a sign district at the zoo and perhaps at other places. And the other things such as Little League signs, we would have to, I don't want to give an example on something which is a hypothetical because it does change depending upon the content. But as it comes to our office, we'll give you our reasoned analysis of it. And trust me, we're trying to be as consistent as we can. And also, there's certain cases that, I can't talk about in public because, there's a certain privilege. But I guess I would just say in general that, we're trying to offer you the most reasonable alternatives available.
Would it help if this body felt compelled to have a discussion because of the sensitivity of other cases to go into closed session later on today, if not another time? But
yes, I
perhaps
think
we need to be able to understand where you're coming from.
Well, yes, we could do that. And also, Mr. Bell has mentioned this is not, unfortunately, the end of the revisions to the sign code. We're trying to grapple with some key issues right now, but there are a lot of things that remain to be studied and resolved. And dealing with some of the signage issues in the park and at other places, that may require some additional study.
Okay. Councilor Krikorian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just on that last point, I think for purposes of context, let me remind us all, I think, that this continues to be, whether we like it or not, continues to be a work in progress. And there's many steps still to be taken before I think anybody in this room is going to be satisfied with any outcome. In fact, there may never come that time. But the fact that whether we move this forward today or not, 6 months from now the council can change it again, make whatever revisions. This is not the be-all and end-all, the ultimate solution, and I don't think anybody should assume that or fear that or expect that that will be the case. I'm confident that it won't. I do want to talk about this sponsorship signage issue a little bit in parks because it's actually deeply concerning to me. As we're talking about, some people, my friend Barry said, let's just get through this time. It's a little more complicated than just saying, let's just get through this time. And when we have youth sports leagues who are, struggling to function, and we're going to have a sign ordinance that, because of constitutional First Amendment concerns, we may force them to take down their sponsorship banners. There's something flawed in that. And, as we've moved forward with this sign prohibition, we've seen again and again unintended consequences that have come from this. Our loss of our murals, the fact that what was once the mural capital of the world now has to deal with the ramifications of having murals being painted out because they're considered to be signs. We haven't thought through the unintended consequences, I'm afraid, of some of these prohibitory things that we're doing. And the impact on parks, I'm afraid, I believe to be one of those things. I don't see, with respect, I don't see how you can draw a distinction between a sign that says Little League thanks Joe Smith DDS and a sign that says Joe Smith DDS. Maybe the first one is an on-site sign, maybe the second is an off-site sign. I don't know. Even if it's an on-site sign, if our prohibition affects any on-site sign that's visible from the right-of-way, then Little League thanks Joe Smith DDS has to come down anyway. So I'm really troubled by this idea. Somebody raised the example of these walls, and why don't we sell this for advertising space? Well, you know what? This building has been in place here for about 80, 90 years, and no one has ever done that because no one in this city has ever thought it appropriate to do that. Not because we've been prohibited from doing it, because of course we're not going to do that. And in fact, I'd like to ask Mr. Muckery to come up for a minute if he's still here. Mr. Muckery, when did the sign prohibition in this city become effective?
I believe about 2002 we began discussing this in earnest.
And prior to that time, are you aware of any prohibition that was in place to prevent parks from constructing billboards at the top of Griffith Park or anywhere else?
Actually, the commission, I have to disagree a little bit with Councilman LeBonge. We have no intention of ever putting a billboard anywhere in our parks, especially on a MacArthur Park on Wilshire Boulevard. There's always been an internal prohibition against that.
Okay. Prior to 2002, was recreational parks prohibited from installing billboards as far as you know?
No, in fact, we have many examples where we have recognized donors both tastefully. Most notably, we're working with the Los Angeles Dodgers on the Dodgers dream fields. And if you go out there, the scoreboards generally have recognition of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Under this ordinance, that would be prohibited.
So I have a Dodger dream field in my district in one of the most socioeconomically challenged areas in my district. And the Dodgers created a new baseball field, added a scoreboard, installed new bleachers, painted the place and cleaned it up. And further to someone's comments about what David Gevin asked for, the scoreboard says Dodgers Dream Field.
That's correct.
And there's no billboard that says, come see the Dodgers. There's nothing that states, here's the Dodgers schedule for this year. There's nothing that says, rush out and buy your season tickets here. It says Dodgers Dream Field.
That's correct. And we have many examples, not just the Dodgers. Over the last 5 years, we've gotten over $20 million in facilities upgrades. And most of them will just want their swatch or the name recognition somewhere on that facility.
So, colleagues, I guess, my concern here is that as we're installing this prohibitory language, anything that recreational parks were to do, anything that it had ever done in its history to install a billboard, which it never has, anything that it would do or attempt to do would still be subject to our review anyway. We could still reverse anything that they decided to do anyway. If they acted out of line, if Mr. Muckery and the professionals in the department who, serve every day in furtherance of our kids' interests, who, make a career out of providing services to our kids, if those professionals in our department chose somehow that they went nuts and decided we're going to start having cigarette ads in our parks or something, that would be in council in 5 minutes. And the Rule 245 motion on that attempt would get a 15-0 vote to overrule them. And I think we all know that.
That's correct. Our policy is going to be very narrow what we allow. Somebody just asked me, would you allow McDonald's to come in the park and advertise? Well, you got to think about that. What is the advertisement? What's the message? Maybe we're fighting obesity and type 2 diabetes, and McDonald's would like to come on and advertise again, going to a more healthier diet. We should be open to that sort of suggestion. I'm not saying we would do it, but I think we have to be open to what is going on in the real world.
Councilmember? Yeah. And if I may, in the COA report, there's reference to the fact that the fiscal year 2011-2012, the council requested the city attorney with the assistance of the LA Zoo Department and CAO to prepare and present any necessary ordinances, including an amendment to the sign ordinance to allow the LA Zoo to maximize special revenue from advertising opportunities such as banners and signage at the LA Zoo. So part of our makeup in our fiscal directives was to find that mechanism that allows for that discretion within the sensitivities that you are articulating.
And exactly, Mr. Chairman, if I may, speaking to the zoo for a moment. Folks, there have been serious proposals in this city to close our zoo. There have been serious proposals to sell our zoo to a private operator who would do God knows what in maximizing their profits in our zoo, which is currently a municipal zoo. It's currently, the zoo that we know and love. That's a very real, that's the very real world that we're currently living in this budget environment. And so because of that, we have tasked people, stakeholders involved in the zoo, with going out to try to find out how can we increase sponsorship, how can we increase private support, how can Glazo do a better job, or others do a better job to try to get philanthropic support of our zoo. And part of that involves a little bit of flexibility on recognition of sponsors. And for us to say, from the get-go that that's not going to be legal, or it's going to be an issue that we're going to have to rush to the city attorney about to determine whether or not we're going to lose a lawsuit or potentially have our entire sign ordinance ban overturned because we're allowing some sponsorships recognitions in some of our parks. I just think it's a ridiculous way to go in trying to make policy when we have in place so many safeguards as it is, when we have in place professionals whose job it is to serve our citizens, not to serve businesses, but to serve our citizens and to provide the kinds of services that our Recreation and Parks Department is right now doing and our Library Department is right now doing after facing the massive cuts, destructive, devastating cuts that they have, and they're still doing that work. So I think we are, as much as I want to compliment planning on moving forward with trying to address a variety of different concerns that have been addressed by the public, by our neighborhood councils, by the business community, and many others, and really, I think, helping to develop an ordinance that will make our ban more defensible and not less. This part, I think, is a part that we still haven't hit the right balance on. I think this part is something that we haven't quite figured out, as Mr. LaBonge was saying, where that fine balance is, and I don't think the language that we have here is enough. I think we need to figure out how both to provide adequate protection, but also to let our departments function. Let our general managers manage, not get in the way of the people for political reasons or any other reason, not get in the way of the professionals who are trying to provide services. So, I'm inclined, Mr. Chair, to withhold impacting public properties on this. I think we need to work further on these issues to try to find where these balances are. Even some of the folks who came up here and testified very, I think, eloquently about needing to protect our parks, and who could disagree with that? I mean, who could disagree with the idea of trying to keep billboards out of our parks? And I very much respect and appreciate those who spoke and have advocated for years to do that. Even some of those who spoke cited the need to try to work some of these issues of sponsorship recognition out. And I think, that's a great offer that we should take them up on and try to figure out how to do. Even the LA Times editorial that so many people cited said in that editorial that sponsorship recognition, as is the case in the state park system, it may be appropriate, but billboards aren't. I would think that we should all be able to agree on that point. Let's recognize our sponsors. Don't put up billboards in Griffith Park. And to be absolutist about this, I think, is not going in the right direction, and it's not going to serve our citizens well. It's not going to serve our parks well. It's not going to serve our libraries well. And I think we need to spend more time, Mr. Chair, figuring this out.
Well, there's a proposal to put on the table, but in response to your statements, and
okay,
I want to make sure you have ask all your questions. The Councilman have a follow-up.
This one issue before, you may have other questions, Mr. Corey, but on this one issue, in order for us to find that balance, particularly for parks, what is the current process? If you get a proposal, let's say it's not a Dodgers, but you get, Nike or something else that says, hey, we'll go clean up a certain park. We will do something. We'll put our logo up there or something. What are the procedures that take place for a decision to be made that allows that or doesn't allow that?
That's a good question. Since we learned from Yogi the Bear, and that was a learning process, we understand our constituent group, our park users, our pad boards, our other groups need to be part of that process. So what we propose is this. When we either actively solicit a donor or we get these unsolicited proposals, we will take it to that individual park that they're targeting, talk to the park leadership before we go to our board. We could even do it concurrently when we work with our park foundation. But I think Councilmember Krikorian said it best, that the constituents that we serve have to have a voice in this too, and we understand that. It's not going to be done unilaterally either by our Parks Foundation or by the General Manager of Recreation Parks. The process will be engaging the community early on, if not first.
And just
And I think we can meet that policy, Mr. Chair. We can develop a policy that will meet those needs without muddling it up with our broader concerns about reducing, commercial billboards to that.
Yes, Mr. Krikorian, that policy procedure, whatever that balance is, be in this ordinance, or what I hear you saying is to leave that discretion up to the departments, which is fine, but we need to make sure there's some very specific procedures in place, which we don't have right now.
Well, within the report, and I'll just put this out there now, and we can follow up with more discussion, because there are other issues I think we have to hit. But one recommendation that's coming from planning is to not only develop the sign unit, but with the sign unit, develop a sign advisory committee made up of the citizenry. So that way, when you do have a level of work that pertains to impacts, what's the utmost, I think, urgent matter here is transparency and the fact that we know where the money is coming from for the sign unit, but that the advisory committee that's made up of citizens are also part of the decision-making as to how the work is being prioritized, one, and how it's being conducted. So that way, when we have sensitivity issues, the sign advisory committee made up of citizens is working hand in hand with the sign unit, and it basically amplifies this transparency. And so we can start moving forward, get some traction on the citywide policy, and where the grind occurs when we start making policy recommendations. It's coming from professional staff in concert with the advisory committee made up of citizens who will have the ability to essentially evaluate and assess the work and move on policy that should be based on merit, should be based on substance and not political quid pro quo or monetary gain of any type for any entity. It has to be about the city. What's healthiest, what's best for the city based on the issues and requirements and needs of the city, understanding that we have a market out there, that we are not prostituting the city or our open space or our parklands. That's not what this is about. That would be my hope, that we could go in that direction, to have that other perspective that's made up of the constituencies and the citizens of this city through the sign advisory committee. And that's something that came from the staff. And they took that from models of other cities. They looked at other structures that were put together that allowed for policy to evolve so you could have this balance, knowing you have these competing tensions. And that would be one way to keep this process going and hopefully get some momentum and real results once we have the resources and we have the balancing of the sign advisory committee.
And I agree with that, Mr. Chair. I think that's important that we move forward in that direction. And I would think that one of the highest priorities of the sign unit should be in resolving this parks issue and ensuring that we have a policy that works to protect our parks, to protect our libraries, to protect those other, precious spaces to be free of commercialization, while at the same time being able to, again, give flexibility to our managers to be able to recognize the people who are giving generously and supporting them, the relationships that we're so often trying to push hard to encourage, to create better partnerships between our local business community and city facilities, our neighborhood councils and city facilities, all of those things. And I think that it should be a priority of the sign unit. The problem is, frankly, sometimes it takes us a while to get up and running with things. We're still, at a point where we don't have a ratepayer advocate's office in place, for example, and that's going to be a while. By the same token, by the time we get a sign unit up and running and promulgate policies through the sign unit and have a citizens commission vetted and then bring it back here and bring it to council, and I would want to hear it in arts, parks, and neighborhoods, and by the time we get through all that, a lot of time has passed. And in the meantime, Mr. Muckery and Mr. Lewis and others who are trying to provide services are left with a prohibition in place. And that's my concern. So I think it makes sense for us to separate this out and to deal with it here and in arts parks and try to develop a policy that's going to work.
What we could do is, as we're moving on the sign unit and sign advisory committee, we can still, I believe, continue to be as agile as possible in scheduling necessary committee meetings so that we do have results based on immediate needs of this budget, immediate needs of the department. And I'd be more than happy to accelerate those hearings, working with you and chairing your committee so we can get this thing out of the way, understanding that we're working almost on parallel tracks. Addressing immediate needs, looking at budget issues, making sure there's substance and sensitivities based on how our professionals within the commission and the department are proposing policy. We can evaluate them. We'll have them in public comments. We'll have public hearing. We'll keep it transparent so that way we don't lose time to address the issue when you were referring to the rate advocate. It's almost 2 years now, and we're still not there. I don't think this can wait.
Right, and in the meantime, I don't want Mr. Muckery to be operating in a way where he feels that he has a sword hanging over his head either, He can
get back to us as soon as he can, and as soon as he's ready.
This guy, he says that's every day.
The bigger sword, okay? But the fact is, as soon as he's ready, I'm ready to move.
Well, how about this? In order to ensure that there's absolute protection against the kind of commercialization that people have talked about, and to make it very simple, wouldn't it make more sense, rather than trying to figure out whether the unless language is really a slippery slope and all this other stuff, rather than trying to figure that out on the fly as we're sitting here, wouldn't it make sense to say, as part of this report to council, that there will be no advertising program in our parks without express council approval until we can work this a broader policy out, and then exclude the Parks Department from this overall sign ordinance now. Exclude that out, say there will be no advertising, nothing that doesn't have council approval, and then in the meantime, go ahead and do the work that we need to do to try to develop a policy that's going to work. Because honestly, I don't want to wait 3 years before we have a resolution of what can and can't be done in our parks.
I think we're saying the same thing. All I'm trying to do is get him, in all due respect, the director of the department, the commission, to do their job to help keep the city healthy and intact to the extent possible, given what's in front of them. I mean, the language that gets us there is where I want to be. But I also know that we are in a position where there's a directive here, as indicated by the CAO, that we need to come up with ordinances and policy that allows them to address those priorities for funding. I think we're saying the same thing.
That issue, Councilman, relates specifically to the zoo.
Okay.
Exhibit H, which is cited in the CAO report. The larger issue of signage at city parks, that can be perhaps addressed by scheduling Ms. Perry's motion. There's a motion by Ms. Perry about this very issue that is pending in this committee. You can always waive it and send it to Mr. Krikorian's committee.
And I'm fine with that. If that gets us to an answer and gets us to some positive direction, I'm willing to do that.
But see, I'm not even familiar with what that motion says.
Well, the motion basically says that there's an issue going on as to signage in the city, and it basically references the city charter and whether Rec and Parks can control signage at its facilities. So it asks planning and I think Rec and Parks to come back to committee with a report to give, I guess, a policy solution to this matter.
Because there's a fundamental issue with the role of the charter.
For a while.
It's the role of the charter with the parks, and under your direction and chairmanship, we can address the charter issue there. And then that can help us set some real clarity as to how we move forward on the bigger picture.
Okay, well, but in the meantime then, wouldn't it make sense to carve that out of the overall ordinance that's directed at commercial signage and sign districts and so on? Wouldn't it make more sense to deal with this as a separate standalone issue and have parks be excluded in this, and then move forward with the Perry motion, have hearings on it, try and figure out a policy that's actually going to work for the parks?
Maybe I'm out of line, but we may want to include other departments in that, the zoo and the libraries.
Well, before we go there, can I just ask the planning department, given your proposal, I'd like to get the reaction on what Councilman Krikorian is proposing. Because again, between the city attorney and the planning department, I've been very careful to stay within the boundaries of the courts and all the legalities that are there. So can we get some feedback from you on his recommendation?
Yes, Alan Bell for the record. Again, we've been working with the committee for the last year, and I think we have been very diligent about following the direction of the committee. And at the last hearing, I just want to emphasize the planning department was not freelancing on this particular issue. We crafted regulations that followed the very clear directions from the committee. What I understand from Councilman Krikorian's discussion about this particular matter is whether or not we would want to have essentially a new process that currently is not drafted, but that we could be drafted, that would allow off-site signs, off-site advertising in city parks, potentially other city facilities, but there would be some process that ultimately the council would have to say yes or no to that. There is not a procedure that expressly gets at that, but is certainly something that could be crafted. Obviously, there are issues in terms of how that procedure would intersect with the rest of the sign ordinance. There may be legal implications in terms of the overall citywide sign ban and other First Amendment issues. What those might be, I can't answer right off the top of my head. But obviously something that would require more thought, which I think is one of the reasons why we had put forward this recommendation for a sign unit that would really be able to delve deeply into these legal issues.
City Attorney?
And policy issues.
Yes, Ken Fong, City Attorney's Office. I would agree with Mr. Bell, and, of course, our office would work with all the departments that are considering this issue. And as I said before, we're looking to make our regulations consistent and all in compliance with the First Amendment. So even though this is just one small piece of it, it's an important piece, and it needs to fit together with the rest of the regulations.
So what we are saying is that the sign unit could be the vehicle by which we respond to Councilman Krikorian's request to move on that as expeditiously as possible.
The sign unit could be that, or if the committee wants to direct us to address it now, we could address it now.
Well, I mean, or we could move forward as is with a prohibition, but if there's an exception, it has to come through council. We need procedures, whether they're at the department level or through this ordinance, and whether that presents some other legal issues, because we're not dealing with it comprehensively. Some procedures need to be put in place to strike that balance. But what if we do move forward with this ordinance, there's a prohibition at parks, but we could get an exception if it comes through council? There's a legal problem with that, right?
Well, City Attorney here again, we really need to think about this. I agree with Councilman Krikorian. We deeply need to think about this before we actually do it. And if it's important enough and the council wants to put resources behind it, we can do it quickly. But we don't want to be doing these decisions ad hoc by the seat of our pants, because that's what's gotten us in trouble in the past.
Because the problem is, okay, if we move forward with and just include parks the same as we include, Wilshire Boulevard. If we do that, then, and the prohibitory language goes into effect, then some of these Little League signs and so on are going to be illegal. They're going to have to all come to council for separate things. I mean, why don't we take a moment, take a deep breath, think about how all these things are impacted in our parks, and just say, set that aside, have the sign unit deal with it, and in the meantime, you know, there's no reason that we have to wait for the sign unit. I'll get started on it next week. You know, that'd be fine.
I would suggest that we do that. We also include other city facilities. They present some of the same issues.
They do. And then in the meantime, just to address the concern that you raised, Mr. Weezer, I would say that although not part of the ordinance, any of those city facilities that want to move forward with any kind of a sign program has to come to council for prior approval. That way we're going to know what they're doing ahead of time. We're going to be able to say, no, that's not appropriate. No, that's really advertising, even though you say it's sponsorship. We're going to be able to address that in the interim while we're working out how to guide the policy. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. I'm trying to follow the path of least resistance and trying to get to the objectives before us. Let me do this. Let me read the directives that have been suggested by staff in working this issue. I'll read them out to you, and then if we need to add any other language that gets to the current discussion, let's work that through with the help of Mr. Bell and the city attorney, Mr. Monk. So let me go through this, and then hopefully get some closure on this discussion. The recommendations would be to approve the planning department prepared draft sign ordinance and request the city attorney to prepare the sign ordinance as to form and legality. That's one. Two, my assumption is that we are in agreement with the CAO report, so it would be to approve on the merits of the CAO recommendation in his report dated December 1st, 2011, that the council consider an amendment to the citywide sign ordinance to allow the LAZ department to apply for a sign district. I think that's the one you want to put on hold for right now?
No, I'm fine with that with the two right now.
Okay, 3, adopt the planning department recommendations in its reports dated July 22nd, 2011, October 5th, 2011, November 21st, 2011, and also the following additional changes recommended in November 21st, 2011 Planning Department report. And that's A, to amend Municipal Code Section 13.11B-1 to allow properties that include a stadium with a seating capacity of 50,000 or more to be eligible for sign districts. B, amend Municipal Code Section 13.11B-3 to improve the limitations on off-site signs near scenic highways and low-density residential zones, and to add limits on its site signs near state or national parks or river implementation overlays. Again, to add limits on on-site signs near state or national parks or river implementation overlays. C, amend Municipal Code Section 14.4.3F to specify that geographically specific regulations supersede Article 4.4 if there is a conflict. D, amend Municipal Code Section 14.4.24B to state that a comprehensive sign program may not be requested for property within a historic preservation overlay zone. E, establish a sign advisory committee to advise proposed sign unit staff and consultants, as well as the City Planning Commission and City Council, on matters related to the sign unit's work, and instruct the Planning Department to prepare a list of potential members that will represent diverse stakeholder viewpoints and submit the list to the Planning Committee for its review and consideration. So that would be the extent of the amendments that were offered by the staff. And essentially that is the extent of the amendments that were advised based on the objectives of this committee. If you'd like some time to look at these sections, it's up to you, colleagues, or if you're ready to go, or if there's other language you'd like to introduce that achieves the goals that were being stated here in our discussion. Councilman?
I just want to be clear on the parks, what direction we're taking, and second, on the zoo. And I just want to be clear on those. And third, if I could add Ms. Perry's proposed amendment on that the reduction only applied to the greater downtown housing incentive area in downtown.
Okay.
From the 5,000 to the 2,640 suggestion.
Okay. Mr. Bell, would you like to clarify or at least articulate more the directions that were advised by the staff?
Yeah, I understand Councilwoman's Perry's recommendation would apply only to the greater downtown housing incentive area, and that would be to reduce the minimum size to be, I think it was around 2,600 linear.
I would just ask Ms. Perry's office, I don't know exactly what that means, why that number was selected, but between now and council we'll have time to figure that out, but I think how you've explained it, it makes sense to do that for downtown, so.
We have the letter and we could just refer to that particular number. The only other point that I would like to add to that punch list of items would be what I had mentioned verbally with respect to the interior sign exception to have that regulated by the residential proximity standard.
Okay, can you repeat that one more time?
There was a recommendation that I had made that for interior, for signs that would qualify for what is called an interior sign exception, that they be regulated by two standards, one automatic sensing device and then two, a reduction to 0.3 candelas if they're based upon within 500 feet of a residential property. That they be subject to that standard.
I see. So there's a court setting, if you will. Right. And the signs are being discussed for interior use because of the person's residential. Right. We enforce lower lighting standards that's complementary to that.
Even though they're essentially interior signs, but they may be in an open air mall, and there might be some light trespass, so they'd be regulated with those two standards and only those two standards.
Especially if a mixed use environment.
Right.
Thank you. Okay. Councilmember?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reyes. One of the other element in Ms. Perry's letter, which was mentioned by a number of the speakers today who spoke in support, I don't think I heard anybody speaking in opposition, but it's important in places, for example, in my district where we have kind of an auto mall there, the auto dealers really need that issue of cross-promotion dealt with on the on-site definition. And I know that's a little tricky to do without, definitionally it's a challenge for the city attorney, but I would like to see us address that so that something that is clearly an on-site sign doesn't become an off-site sign merely because they're conducting cross-promotional advertising for the services that go on that site.
Okay, so how would we, I'm trying to look at a directive that gets to the objective, Councilman Krikorian.
I've got some language. It's at least for the city attorney to see if they like it. We would change the definition of on-site sign from, I don't have the language as it is now handy, but it would say a sign that is used to advertise business conducted or services rendered or goods produced or sold on the property upon which the sign is placed, and then add to that, which may include references to business conducted, services rendered, or goods produced or sold at a location other than the property upon which the sign is placed, provided that those references serve to promote business conducted or services rendered or goods produced or sold on the property upon which the sign is placed. So that it might make reference to something off-site as long as it's being used to promote something that's on-site. That would address the whole cross-promotional aspect.
So you want that strong nexus?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So that is part of the definition of what an on-site sign is.
Are we okay with that? Can we go there?
I think we'd have to take a look at the language to make sure that it's consistent with, the principle of on-site signage.
Yes, city attorney, yes, we would have to do that, and we most strongly have to speak with building and safety because they're put in the position of interpreting the two definitions. And I think that we've had a little discussion with them. I think they may be leaning toward that anyway, but, we'll discuss with them.
Okay. Is there anything else we want to put on the table and or direct us? I think we can conclude if you feel okay. We're moving on.
Well, the other thing we didn't deal with is the grandfathering date and those sorts of issues that were addressed.
Okay, well, the grandfathering date, I understand through a motion, we needed to include Paramount, right? So we need to set the date for...
Actually, Mr. Bell, if I could just ask, you mentioned Paramount and there was one other that...
There was to do an oversight. There was an initiated sign district along Jameswood Avenue in Central City West that was in 2008, and that would meet the cutoff point of August the 9th of this year that we had put in our report. Paramount came in after that date in October. So based upon all of the recommendations we've had in the 3 reports we've given to this committee, we have stuck with the August 9th date. We would need an instruction to move that date forward to a different date. At least August, I believe it was August the 13th, was the date that they filed their notice of preparation for the environmental impact report. Today could be a date or some other date at the committee's discretion.
Okay, so since that discussion first came up, you haven't had a run on the office of new sign districts that are trying to get under the line or anything, have you? Are there anything else in the pipeline that's sort of rushing to get in and get grandfathered status?
Not that has been referred to the planning department.
Okay.
Or the only 2 that have been referred to the planning department specifically are the Jameswood, and then we have the notice of preparation for the Paramount.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that these are people who have worked in good faith under the law as it exists to try to develop a plan for something that is based on the law that exists now. I don't think it's fair to change the rules on them at the last minute. I think it is important that Paramount and projects that are similarly situated to that, and apparently there's just a handful of them, would be included.
That's fine.
In grandfathering. There's also I have a development of my own in my district that is supported by totally supported by the community that would like to have that kind of status too. So there's no real logic to having it be a plum date, especially if there hasn't been a rush on the office to think of. So I would think that we would have it have the date. The relevant date would be the date that it goes to council, which is next week. Is it?
Yes.
Next week.
Well, we are going to be, the directive on today would be to send this to the city attorney for formal legality, and then it's going to come back to us to make sure that what's there is what we wanted to see.
To this committee.
To this committee. So, again, it's just to be that much more careful, take those steps to review the document before we get it to council. So we do have the flexibility to use this date, or we want to use a date when we review the document. It's really a policy matter that it's up to us at this stage of the process. We don't have to wait till the council day itself.
Okay.
So if you'd like to use this date, because I don't see anything else coming in, I don't see anything in the pipeline like you were observing, and so we can use this date, or we can use the date when the document comes back. Tomorrow, I'm sorry. We can use tomorrow as well.
Yeah, well, I guess if we do that, then if we just set it at tomorrow, then we'll eliminate any possibility of a rush on the office. Not that there's likely to be, but why don't we just
There's
do that?
nothing in the pipeline. We're trying to accommodate the entities you're describing. We'll follow the rules. So if we set tomorrow as a date, then we'll be okay.
So the date would be December 6th.
Okay.
So somebody rushed today and put an application in today.
Okay.
We're closed, planning department.
That date will show up on the draft from the city attorney when we review it in this committee. Okay.
One other question. I just want clarification. I know we've battered this one a bit, but on the parks and the public facilities, we're going to keep our ordinance silent now, and you will make every effort, along with the proper committees, to work with the sign unit to come back to come up with some procedures. That may be through ordinance, that may be through having the departments ensure that they have some procedures in place, but something will come up.
So the council file number of Ms. Perry's motion is 110724, that speaks as to the signage at city parks. So your directive would be to take out section O on page 20 of the draft document that planning submitted. Take out that section and say instead that Ms. Perry's motion will be studied either in this committee or in the Arts Committee, whichever committee is most appropriate, or jointly.
Okay, we can do a joint committee and knock it out quicker.
And as far as Mr. Riza's question as to the CAO report and the zoo, I believe that there was a recommendation to approve that, right?
Right.
Okay.
Council members, so if we did take out that provision, that is a section O, that the CLA identified, then that would mean that there would be they would be able to file for a sign program, and that the interior sign exception would apply to city facilities and parks if you remove that provision number O. So two things I want to point out so we understand what the significance is of that would mean. If it's a sign program, the procedure is that they would file an application with the planning department. There was like a $30,000 application fee. It would go, the city planning commission could approve it, and then on appeal, it could go before the city council. But if the commission approves it, it would end there. If council wanted to 245 it under the city's charter, then they could do that. Under the interior sign exception, there is no procedure for that. It's ministerial, and the way the language is drafted, council would have no say and would not be able to weigh in on whether that advertising could be allowed or not allowed. So I take it the direction would be to draft the language to ensure that in all circumstances, council would have discretion to allow the advertising in city parks and facilities. Is that correct?
Rather than trying to piecemeal this right now, my suggestion would be let's exclude from this ordinance today, as we're moving forward, city property. With the proviso that any advertising on any city property has to be approved by council, so that we know that there's no ministerial actions like this, for whether it's interior or exterior, I don't care. They're not doing any advertising, no signage, without coming to council first. I mean, I think we can do that and then just exclude it from this while we're working on the Perry motion and the other policies. So just exclude city property today, move forward with the drafting of this, and then separately move forward with a separate policy that will deal with city-owned property, so that we don't have these sorts of challenges. Unless there's, I don't know if there's if you're going to jump out of your seat for constitutional reasons for this, but remember when we dealt with the Neal situation, we had a similar kind of thing, distinguishing between what the city owns and what is out there in the commercial world.
I know, Councilman. See, my problem is that if we go ahead and, I trust the city council, but if you don't have any regulations in place now, I'm not sure if I know what rules you'll be following in terms of approving some signs and disapproving others.
That's why I had proposed a prohibition and then get the exception, but get the exception, they give discretion, and that's also...
I would be more comfortable, if we put a hold on it and studied it expeditiously and come up with some type of regulations. I mean, I just feel like it's a danger, even if you're carefully considering these things, not to have guidelines, because that in itself raises First Amendment issues.
All right, so when you put a hold on it, meaning what?
Well, it's just I don't know what's happening now. I don't know if they're not approving, as far as I know, they're not approving these signs in parks now. So I'm just saying that
And if they were to do it, we would 245 it anyway. So we don't need to have the extra belts and suspenders of saying that.
Well, that's true, but I thought at the beginning you or somebody else said that we don't really have a set of procedures for approving signs in parks, and I guess I just feel discomfort knowing that there's no regulations, and if, one set of signs comes up for one park, it may be treated very differently from another, and, there's a lot of legal discomfort with that. So I just think we need to study this. I don't mean that we should sit on it forever, like everybody fears, but we need to be cautious.
So your suggestion would be to exclude it now, not add any other requirements now until we've had a chance to study the context of it and develop a separate policy for city properties?
Well, either that or keep this ordinance the way it is, which does allow signs through a sign district, because we've established through case law that you can have sign districts, and that's the reason why planning has so strongly pushed that.
Mr. Councilmember, if the sign use if we follow the directives and recommendations that were stated, what we're saying is that, at least for the zoo, that we allow them to consider, for them to apply for a sign district, which in of itself defines rules and regulations on how they make decisions in allowing for signs, at least within the zoo.
Well, yes, it does, and some people may think that that is overkill to have a sign district, but it ensures safety from a legal perspective, and it gives flexibility to the zoo operators. They can basically put what type of signs they want up there. They're not going to have to think, well, is this on-site or off-site? They can have off-site signs.
Right, and we're setting up procedures through this ordinance for the application of sign use districts throughout the city, correct?
Yes, there's flexibility, just like any other sign district. As a legislative tool, you as the city council can allow them to have whatever type of signage you wish to allow them in a sign district.
So if a council member feels that in their respective district there's a park that there is no way the constituency or any stakeholders want to see signs there, they won't allow it.
Well, that's true, and we've had a lot of discussion about a sign district for the zoo, so I think planning is comfortable with that. I haven't seen particular applications for sign districts for other parks. They may not qualify, but
Councilmember Barnes, in his passion, came in and said, I don't want to see signs in the parks. I mean, that's basically what I heard him say. So he doesn't have to have one. He doesn't have to have a signage district.
That's true. I guess to bottom line it, I would say that you have powerful legislative tools that the courts have given you, but I think what the courts ask you to do is to make your rules very clear, and if you do want to allow signs in a certain park or a certain place, you have to be very clear that you're allowing them there, and you have to put together sufficient findings justifying why you're allowing signs in this park or this other place and not anywhere else.
Got it. And I get it. Our turn us off today, though, is I think we all agree that we shouldn't fall into the danger of us making preference for one type of speech over another in our parks, and that's the danger that we're facing. So all we need to know is, for today, what's the safest route today to come back with a solution on that when we put more thought on it? And are we okay with Mr. Krikorian's proposal to say, let's just take it out, take that section out, and move the ordinance forward? Would that present a problem for us?
Well, we would still have what we have today, which is an absence of legislation, and we don't have direction as it stands now. And so long as you don't put signs up, I don't think it's a problem. But the problem becomes if you haven't enacted clear legislation, and then you put a sign up here and you put a sign up there, and each one seems somewhat innocuous, but when you start to combine them, it could be a problem. So, I think either you choose to adopt the ordinance the way it's written now, and keeping in mind that you can always change it later, it's not even at council yet, or you take that section out knowing that you're really not going to allow signs in the park until you figured out the process.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we move forward with this? When it comes back, in that section O is something that we need to continue to work on. We'll come to that realization, and or as you're working it, your office can include language and or look at other verbiage that will satisfy the concerns of Councilman Krikorian.
That's a very good suggestion, because when I'm drafting something, I normally don't like to take something else unless I have something to replace it with. And right now, I don't actually know what that would be.
So we do have the flexibility of Councilman Krikorian's office working with you on Section O to address the needs and priorities that he has stated, so that by the time it comes back here, it could be folded in?
Well, yes, we could work with the planning department, and obviously, this is going to come back to this committee, so we could do it that way.
Yeah, and I'm open to scheduling it, Councilman Krikorian, and your committee, and work through it there as well. So if you want to do this like once a week and pound it out, I'll work with you. You want to do it once every 2 weeks, I'll work with you. The Christmas Eve, I'll be here. I've been doing it 10 years now. I want to get it over with. But, yeah, let's understand, we have that flexibility, and I'll be willing to work with you on that.
Now get this, the risk is if you guys don't move fast enough, there's going to be some little leagues and others who will be left without funding if we don't move fast enough on that, because there's going to be a prohibition. And it's unclear, and I think from hearing from our city attorney is you're going to side on this side of...
Well, I understand that danger, but, at least they can come talk to our office about proposals now, and, there are some things I'm sure that would be okay, but, we have to take those as they come.
I'm not going to be satisfied with the current language remaining in place until some uncertain date in the future when a sign unit can consider this. I'm not going to be satisfied with that. So I'm fine with us bringing it back here once the language is drafted up and hashing this out a little bit more on this issue. But I don't want to wait 3 years before the Little League needs to, knows whether or not it can put its banner up from the local dentist office. I just think that's...
I don't have 3 years.
How many months?
What's funny is he said that so gleefully.
I have weeks. I'm counting weeks now.
So one other question on the zoo, because I gather we're going forward with the recommendation on adding them as a specifically eligible site, but that's the beginning of the process, is it not, Mr. Bell? So we still have to go through an entire public vetting of this to determine what that means, what the scope of it's going to be, what the restrictions on any such sign district would be, all of those sorts of things. This is not, if we were to approve this today and the council approves this ordinance with that addition, that doesn't mean that billboards are going to start popping up in the zoo, does it? I mean, we still have to go through that whole entitlement process.
That is absolutely correct. I mean, there would have to be environmental review, compliance with CEQA. We would have to have a public hearing. The Planning Commission would have to weigh in, hold a hearing, make a determination, a staff report. So it would be a very long process. And, of course, the application would be subject to the rules within the sign ordinance itself in terms of meeting the worldwide rush test and so on and so forth.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, the worldwide rush test just raised one other issue. On the grandfathered districts, did we... you mentioned on the number of choices going forward as to what findings would be required and whether there would be takedowns or what the ratio of the takedown would be and how that compares to community benefits. On the grandfathered districts, it's my understanding that some of those don't have a takedown capacity. Is that right? Or one even mentioned that it had already done a number of takedowns that it wasn't being given credit for. So can you speak more to that?
Yes. That had to do with a pending sign district, whether or not they would get credit for signs that had been taken down at some time in the past. What we included in our provision is that the takedown credit And this would be not for the grandfathered sign districts, but for future sign districts. For future sign districts, they'd be subject to the new rules, and for future sign districts, that they only be given credit for signs taken down after the sign district itself was established. So obviously we would want to not set up a situation where someone would be taking credit for signs taken down 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, and saying, well, we've met the obligation by taking down signs that happened 3 decades ago.
Might have been for their own business reasons or whatever.
Right. So that's a protection. Again, if it's grandfathered, that particular requirement would not be spelled out, but we would have a requirement that they comply with either the board-wide rush findings and then also community takedown and sign reduction, but how that would be spelled out would be determined at the time of application and as it would go through the whole approval process.
So if they're grandfathered, they're trying to operate under the laws that exists now, and the law that exists now would include the worldwide rush requirements for findings.
We'd have to take a second look at that, but I don't believe that would cause a problem for the particular sign district that was referenced today.
Okay.
So if we go forward with the recommendations as that has been stated, there's nothing precludes the staff from working on the Jan Perry motion so we can fold in those issues as soon as possible.
Our preference would be to be provided with additional resources if we were going to go beyond what is on the table today. Anything beyond that, our position is that the sign unit would have to be funded. It's a very significant undertaking, and until we are given with the staff, the consultant resources, quite frankly, we've reached our limit as far as what we can absorb with the staff and the resources that we have. Just carrying this forward today.
Well, we'll talk about that more, but we need to move that. In order for us to make sure we got resources coming in for the city, that work has to get done. So I know we're in a catch-22.
Right.
But we will keep pushing hard on getting it done. And I do want to take a moment to thank you, Ellen, and Daisy for your hard work, because I know how hard you worked on this. And it's been a tremendous crunch, especially in the holidays, but I want to thank you for your hard work. So, colleagues, do we feel comfortable with the amendments as stated?
Sorry, one other question.
Okay.
Because I didn't quite follow what you said on the grandfathered sites and its impact on worldwide rush. You drew a distinction between what would be required of those going forward.
Right.
So, for the grandfathered sites, is the current state of the ordinance also requiring those same takedown ratios for the grandfathered sites, or
yes?
Okay, well, along the lines of what we just said, if there are some that don't have the ability to do that, and they've been operating under a different set of rules, they've been operating under worldwide rush, the current state of the law, without those additional requirements that we're imposing on districts going forward, wouldn't it be appropriate to have those grandfathered districts actually comply with the existing state of the law, which would be, findings only under worldwide rush?
Because our position is that begs the question, how would we make sure that they comply with worldwide rush? And what we have put forth is the menu of options to comply with that is either community benefits or sign reduction. If it's not one of those two, then what would it be? So since we have the law now, today, in effect, and we have that legal framework, the planning department's position is that we apply the worldwide rush legal framework to the granting of any exception going forward from today. The city attorney's office has indicated that they would have to make those findings in order for them to sign off for form and legality for any of those, and that the most effective, substantial way of doing that is to make sure that the grandfathered projects also be subject to some bundle of takedown or community benefits. And if it's good enough for projects going forward, we believe that it's also appropriate for those projects that really, at this point, are in the very early stages of the approval process. Planning Department hasn't reviewed them, Planning Commission hasn't weighed in, and it hasn't gone before the council. But it sets forth reasonable ground rules and makes sure that we are, in fact, going to be compliant with the legal mandate.
You done, sir? I see you're contemplating.
It's coming back, right? So
it's coming back.
I'll address it
it's
when it
coming
comes back.
And we'll be able to see it in writing, and then we can dig in and look one more time. So are we okay with the directives? I have them in writing, like to...
Yes, so the disposition for this item is that the clerk will write a letter to the various city departments that incorporates the requests as well as the that was made by the committee. And once this response is prepared and submitted, it will be scheduled again in committee. But at this time, this item will remain in committee.
Remain in committee and requesting the city attorney to repair the signed ordinance as to formal legality. And all the rest of the recommendations, I have that in writing, I can get that to you.
And approval of the CAO report.
And approval of the CAO report, right.
And the issue of Ms. Perry's motion.
Exactly.
And the Planning Department's verbal recommendations.
Right.
Okay. Anything else? I did it once before, so are we covered? Has everything been stated? Okay. Thank you very much again. Appreciate your patience out in the audience, and thank you, colleagues. We'll get through this. Thank you. This meeting is anybody have a public comment? Saying none, this meeting is adjourned.